Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It was a Tuesday, I think, because I remember the mine shift starts early in the week, and I was on my usual commute to the Gladstone mine up north of Silverton, Colorado. I've been doing this drive for years, so I know the road like the back of my hand. US Route 550 over Red Mountain Pass. It's a twisty, narrow, two-lane highway that cuts through the mountains, and in the early hours, it's pitch black out there. No streetlights, just your headlights cutting through the darkness, and sometimes the moon, if it's out. That morning it was around 5:30, and the sky was still that deep, inky color, not even a hint of dawn. I was alone in my pickup truck, sipping on some coffee I'd grabbed from home, trying to wake up. The radio was playing some old country station, but I had it low because the silence of the mountains always feels heavier in the dark. I was coming up on a straight section of the road, just past one of the sharper curves, when I saw something move on the steep embankment to my right. At first, I thought it was maybe a deer or an elk. You see them out there all the time, especially in the early hours, but this was different. The movement was quicker, more deliberate, and it was higher up on the slope, where the trees thin out and the rock gets loose. I slowed down a bit, not sure what I was looking at, and that's when it happened. This large, dark figure just dropped down from the embankment. I mean, it came down fast, like it had been waiting or something, and it landed on the road right in front of me. My headlights caught it full on, and for a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. But no, it was real. It crossed the two-lane highway in just 4 steps. I counted them because it happened so quick, but it stuck in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, and it was across. It paused for a heartbeat right in front of one of those slide area warning signs, the yellow ones that tell you to watch for falling rocks, and that's when I got a better look. The thing was walking fully upright on 2 feet, but it wasn't like a person. Its posture was slouched, kind of hunched over, but it moved with this quick, powerful gait, like it was in a hurry, but not running. It was big, way bigger than a man, and covered in dark, shaggy hair or fur. I couldn't tell exactly, but the worst part was its eyes. When it turned its head slightly, my headlights hit them, and they reflected back at me multiple times, like how an animal's eyes glow in the dark, but brighter and more intense. It wasn't just a flash. It was like they held the light for a second, and I felt this jolt go through me, like ice water in my veins. In that moment, I knew it wasn't a bear. I've seen bears out here, black bears, grizzlies sometimes, and they don't move like that. Bears can stand up, but they're clumsy on 2 feet, and they don't cross a road in 4 smooth steps. This thing moved like it was built for it, and the way it paused by the sign, it felt almost purposeful, like it knew what it was doing. My heart started hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles going white, and I must have hit the brakes without even thinking, because the truck slowed to a crawl. I stopped the car right there in the middle of the road. Thank God no one was behind me, and I just sat there, staring at where it had been. The figure had disappeared over the west embankment, down into the trees, and the darkness swallowed it up like it was never there. For a few seconds I didn't move. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud in the quiet of the cab, and the coffee I'd been drinking suddenly felt like acid in my stomach. My hands were trembling, and I had to force myself to take a deep breath. I didn't get out. Hell no, I wasn't getting out. Something in my gut told me to stay put, that whatever that was, it wasn't something I wanted to follow. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or so, I put the truck back in gear and drove off slowly, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. Nothing, just the empty road and the dark shapes of the trees. The rest of the drive to the mine was a blur. I kept replaying what I saw over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it. Was it a person? No. Too big, too fast. A bear? Definitely not. The more I thought about it, the more a word popped into my mind. Sasquatch. I'd heard stories, read stuff online, but I never put much stock in it until now. When I got to the mine, I parked and just sat in the truck for a bit, trying to calm down. My shirt was damp with sweat, and I felt cold, even though the heater was on. I went through the motions at work, checking in, gearing up, heading underground, but my mind wasn't there. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept picturing those reflective eyes. The guys I work with must have noticed I was off, because one of them asked if I was feeling okay. I just shrugged and said I didn't sleep well. I couldn't bring myself to tell them what happened. They'd have laughed me out of the room. The shift dragged on, and all I could think about was getting back to that spot on the road. I needed to see if there was any evidence, anything that proved I wasn't going crazy. When work finally ended, I hurried out, skipping the usual chit-chat, and got back in my truck. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows over the mountains, and the drive back felt eerie. I was tense the whole way, my eyes scanning the embankments, half expecting to see something again. When I reached the straightaway where it happened, I pulled over onto the shoulder, right where I'd stopped that morning. My heart was beating fast again, and I took a minute to steady myself before I got out. The air was cold and crisp, with that mountain smell of pine and damp earth. I walked over to the east embankment where the figure had dropped down, and that's when I saw them, large indentations in the soil and loose rock on the slope. They weren't footprints exactly, more like depressions where something heavy had landed and then pushed off. They were big, bigger than any animal track I'd seen, and spaced out in a way that matched how it moved. I crouched down to get a closer look, and my stomach twisted. The ground was disturbed, like something had slid down quickly, and there were marks leading toward the road. I followed the trail with my eyes, across the highway to the west side, and I could see similar indentations over there, leading into the trees. It was all there, real and tangible. I stood up, my breath fogging in the cold air, and I just felt this wave of, validation mixed with dread. I wasn't imagining things. Whatever it was, it left a mark. I took out my phone and snapped a couple of pictures, but they didn't do it justice, just looked like blurry patches in the dirt. After a few minutes, I got back in the truck and drove home, my mind racing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept going over everything, and finally I decided to tell a couple of close friends about it. I called one up, and as soon as I started describing it, he cut me off with a laugh. "Dude, you've been working too hard," he said. "Probably just a bear or a trick of the light." I tried to explain the details, the bipedal walk, the eyes, the indentations, but he just brushed it off. Another friend I told was a little more sympathetic, but still skeptical. "Maybe it was a person in a costume or something," he suggested, but I knew it wasn't. The way it moved, the size, the sheer speed, it wasn't human, so I stopped talking about it. I kept it to myself, and over time, it became this private thing I'd think about when I was driving alone or lying awake at night. I started reading up on Sasquatch sightings, especially in Colorado, and I found accounts that sounded similar. Bipedal creatures in remote areas, quick movements, those reflective eyes. It didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made the fear more real because it meant I wasn't the only one. But here's the thing that still gets me. That moment when it paused by the sign. It was so brief, but it felt intentional, like it was acknowledging me or something. And those eyes. I'll never forget how they caught the light, multiple reflections that seemed to pierce right through me. It wasn't just fear, it was this deep, primal terror that settled in my bones. Even now, when I drive that pass in the early morning, I'm extra cautious, my eyes constantly scanning the slopes. I've never seen anything like it again, and part of me hopes I never do. I don't have any proof to show anyone. No clear photos or videos, just those indentations that are probably gone by now, washed away by rain or snow. But I know what I saw, and it stuck with me. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I'll remember that feeling, the shock, the cold sweat, the way my heart pounded, and it all comes rushing back. I can't explain it, and I don't think I ever will. All I know is, that day on Red Mountain Pass, I saw something that shouldn't exist, and it left me with a chill that hasn't gone away. Story 2. It was one of those trips we'd been planning for months. Me and my buddy, we'd been talking about it since the last season ended. This spot, it's way out there. You take the main highway for a couple hours, then a logging road that's more pothole than road for another 40 minutes, and then you're on a dirt track that just kind of fades into the woods. It's our place, or it was. We pulled in late afternoon, the sun already starting to dip behind the tallest firs. The truck was packed with our gear, the camper on the back loaded up. We were tired from the drive, just looking forward to cracking a beer, getting a fire going and unwinding. The second we rolled into the clearing, that feeling just evaporated. The place was trashed, not like party trashed with beer cans. It was weird. There was garbage, but it was scattered like it had been pulled out of a bag and just thrown around. A busted plastic jug over by the fire pit. Some torn rags that might have been a shirt or something caught on a bush. And the structures. That was the weirdest part. Teepee things made out of logs. They weren't big, maybe 4 or 5 feet tall, just stacks of long, straight branches leaned against each other. They looked deliberate, but also kind of clumsy, like a kid would build. There were 3 of them, arranged in a rough triangle around the clearing. It pissed me off, honestly. After that long drive, to find our spot looking like some asshole's dumping ground. It just set a bad tone right from the start. My buddy just sighed and said, "Well, this is a hell of a welcome." We got out, started kicking the junk aside. It felt disrespectful, you know, not just to us, but to the whole forest. This is a clean place, usually. Quiet. We started setting up camp, not talking much. The usual routine. I got the camp chairs out. He started clearing a spot for the fire. The whole time, I had this nagging feeling. The woods were too quiet. I mean, it's always quiet out there, but this was different. It was a dead quiet. No birds, no squirrels chattering, nothing. Just the sound of us moving around and the wind in the tops of the trees. Way up high, we got the fire going as the last of the light faded. The flames helped a little, pushing back the dark that was crowding in from the trees. We cooked dinner on the grate, just some burgers, and sat there eating, not saying a whole lot. The silence was heavy. We both felt it. We'd usually be talking about the next day's hunt, where we'd go, that kind of thing. But tonight, we just stared into the fire. I kept glancing over my shoulder into the woods. It felt like we were being watched, not in a paranoid way, just a feeling, a pressure. Like when you walk into a room and a conversation just stops. After we ate, we cleaned up, doused the fire real good, and decided to call it a night. It was only about 9 o'clock, but neither of us wanted to sit out in that silence anymore. The camper on the back of the truck felt like a fortress. It's small, just enough for 2 bunks, a little table and a door at the back. We climbed in, locked the door, and the sound of the latch clicking into place was a solid metal sound, a good sound. We read for a bit by the battery-powered lamp, but I couldn't concentrate. My ears were straining, trying to pick up anything outside. There was nothing, just absolute stillness. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew, the world exploded. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't something bumping into us. It was a bang, a single massive, terrifyingly loud impact that hit the back door of the camper. The whole truck rocked on its springs. I was jolted awake so hard I swear my heart stopped for a second. The sound was immense, a hollow metallic whoomp that was so loud it felt like it was inside my head. The door latch, this heavy-duty metal bar, was vibrating with a high-pitched, violent buzz, like someone had struck a giant tuning fork against the door. For a second, we just froze. The darkness was absolute. Then my buddy from the other bunk whispered, "What the hell was that?" My heart was hammering in my chest, so hard I could feel it in my throat. I couldn't speak. I just lay there, ears ringing, every muscle tensed. We listened. Nothing. No footsteps running away, no growling, no crunching of branches, just that same profound, heavy silence, but now it was 1,000 times more terrifying because of what had just shattered it. "Maybe the window blind fell," my buddy said, his voice shaky. It was the only thing we could think of. The blinds on the little side windows are metal, and if they came unclipped, they could make a racket. It was a stupid thought, even then, because the sound had come from the back, from the door, and it was 100 times louder than a falling blind. But your brain grabs onto the first normal thing it can think of. "Yeah," I managed to croak out. "Maybe." We didn't move. We just lay there in the dark, listening. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The silence was worse than the bang. It was a waiting silence. I was straining so hard to hear something that I started hearing things that weren't there. Little creaks, phantom rustles. My skin was crawling. I was covered in a cold sweat. I've never felt fear like that. It was a pure animal fear, the kind that locks you in place. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm gonna look," I whispered. I fumbled for my flashlight on the little shelf next to my bunk. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I clicked it on, the beam cutting a shaky path through the dark camper. I swung my legs out of the bunk, my feet hitting the cold floor. Every movement felt incredibly loud. I crept to the back door, my buddy watching me from his bunk, his eyes wide in the reflected light. I didn't want to open that door. I really didn't. But I had to know. I put my hand on the cold metal latch. I took a deep breath, held it, and slowly, quietly, slid the latch open. The click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet. I pulled the door inward, just a crack, and shone the flashlight out. The beam swept across the ground, the trees at the edge of the clearing. Nothing. No animal, no person, no fallen branch. Nothing out of place. The cool night air drifted in, smelling of pine and damp earth. It was just normal, eerily, impossibly normal. I opened the door a little wider, leaning out, scanning the area around the truck. The ground was soft from recent rain, perfect for holding tracks. There was nothing, not a single footprint, not a scuff mark. It was as if the bang had been a ghost. I pulled the door shut and locked it again, my heart still thumping. "There's nothing out there," I said, my voice barely a whisper. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. We just sat there in the dark, in our bunks, listening. Every little sound the truck made as it cooled down made us jump. The night felt endless. I kept looking at my watch. 2:53, 3:17.4:02. The numbers just crawled by. When the first grey light of dawn finally started to filter through the little windows, it was the biggest relief of my life. We both got up, moving stiffly. We didn't talk about it much. We just started making coffee on the little propane stove, the routine of it giving us something to focus on. It was only in the full light of day that the sheer impossibility of what happened started to sink in. We went outside and looked at the back of the camper. The door was fine. No dent, no scratch, nothing. We looked at the ground again in the clear morning light. Still no tracks. Nothing. My buddy walked over to the door and pushed on it with the heel of his hand. It made a dull thud. Nothing like the sound we'd heard. He balled his fist and hit it, a sharper rap, still not even close. "Maybe it was a bear," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Where are the tracks?" I asked. "And what bear hits a door once and then just vanishes without a sound? And why hit the door? If it smelled food, it would have been trying to get in, scratching, sniffing." We tried to recreate the sound. He stood outside, and I lay in my bunk. He shoved his shoulder against the door. He kicked it. He even found a big, thick branch and swung it like a baseball bat against the metal siding, away from the door. The sounds were all wrong. They were sharp impacts, cracks and bangs. The sound we'd heard was different. It was a deep, percussive, hollow boom. It had a weight to it that we couldn't replicate. The closest we got was when he slapped the flat of his hand, open-palmed, as hard as he could against the door. It made a loud smack, and it made the latch vibrate a little. But it was a pathetic, small sound compared to the memory of that bang. His handprint was red and stinging. Whatever hit that door, it was a hell of a lot bigger and stronger than a man. That's when the real dread started to set in. It wasn't anger or confusion anymore. It was a deep, cold fear. We both looked at each other, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. We'd talked about this stuff before, sitting around campfires, reading stuff online, Bigfoot, Sasquatch. It all started to click into place, and it was a horrible picture. The garbage, scattered, not dumped, like something had been rummaging through a bag. Those stupid teepee structures, marking territory, the dead silence in the woods. No animals because a predator was around, a big one. And then the bang, not an attack, a warning, a get the hell out of my house warning. An open-handed slap from something with a hand the size of a dinner plate, and the strength to shake a 3/4-ton truck on its suspension. We didn't say a word, we just started packing. We moved faster than we ever have, throwing gear into the truck, not even bothering to fold things properly. We left the teepee structures where they were. We didn't touch anything. The whole time, my back felt exposed. The feeling of being watched was so intense, it was like a physical weight on my shoulders. I kept expecting to see movement in the trees, to hear another bang, to see something step out into the clearing. We were in the truck, engine running, within 20 minutes. As we pulled out, bouncing down that dirt track, I looked back in the side mirror. The clearing looked small and peaceful in the morning sun. Empty. But it didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. We didn't speak for the first hour of the drive. We just listened to the tires on the pavement and watched the trees go by. We never went back to that spot. I don't think I could ever make myself. I still go hunting, but I stick to more populated areas now. I don't like the deep quiet anymore. And sometimes late at night, if I hear a weird noise outside my house, I'll remember that sound. That single world-shaking bang on the door, and I'll remember the silence that followed, the waiting. And I just know, that we were told to leave, and we listened. Story 3. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out. I've never told anyone the whole thing because it sounds crazy. And honestly, I'm still kind of shaken up when I think about it. This happened last fall, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I was out camping by myself in this national forest. I won't say exactly where because I don't want to stir up any trouble or have people thinking I'm making this up. But it was one of those trips where I just needed to get away from everything. Work had been piling up, and I felt like I was drowning in noise and people. So I packed my gear and drove out to this spot I'd scouted online. It was supposed to be peaceful, you know, just me, the trees, and some quiet. I set up my tent about a mile from a shelter that was marked on the map. It was one of those lean-to things where hikers sometimes stop for the night. But I wanted real solitude, so I picked a spot deeper in the woods. The first day was fine, beautiful even. The air was crisp and the leaves were starting to turn, so everything was shades of orange and red. I spent the afternoon just walking around, listening to the birds and the rustle of squirrels in the underbrush. It was exactly what I needed. But as the sun started to dip lower, that familiar camping excitement began to twist into something else. I can't really explain it, but I started feeling edgy. It wasn't like a sudden fear, more like a slow creep of unease that settled in my gut. You know that feeling when you're alone in the woods and your brain starts playing tricks on you? Every little sound seemed louder and the shadows between the trees felt like they were watching me. By dusk, I was downright nervous. My heart was beating a little faster and I kept glancing over my shoulder for no reason. It was stupid, I know. I've camped alone before and never had issues, but this time it was different. The woods felt heavier, like the air was thick with something I couldn't see. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the isolation getting to me, but I couldn't ignore the itch to be closer to other people. That's when I decided to pack up and move closer to the shelter. I figured if there were other campers around, I'd feel safer, and maybe I could get a decent night's sleep. So I stuffed my tent and sleeping bag into my pack, threw it on my back, and started walking down the path toward the shelter. The trail was narrow and covered in pine needles, so my footsteps were quiet, but everything else seemed amplified. The wind picked up, making the trees sway and creak, and I could hear the distant call of an owl somewhere. It should have been calming, but it just made me more aware of how alone I was. My pack felt heavier than usual, digging into my shoulders, and I had to keep adjusting the straps. I remember the cool evening air biting at my face, and I pulled my jacket tighter, wishing I'd brought a warmer one. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. I was maybe halfway to the shelter, walking at a steady pace, when I heard this sudden crashing noise to my left. It was loud, like something big and heavy moving fast down a steep slope. I froze right there on the path, my heart slamming against my ribs. The sound was so abrupt it felt like it punched through the quiet. I turned my head slowly, peering into the trees, but it was already getting dark, and the shadows made it hard to see much. My first thought was bear. I've run into bears before while hiking, and they usually make a racket when they're startled, but this was different. The crashing didn't slow down or stop. It just kept going, like whatever it was, booking it away from me. I could hear branches snapping and leaves rustling, and it sounded like it was moving downhill in a hurry, almost like it was scared. That's what got me, the skittishness. Bears aren't usually that jumpy unless you surprise them. But I hadn't made much noise. I was just walking, minding my own business. Plus, the slope there was pretty steep, covered in loose rocks and dense brush. If it was a bear, it would have been clumsy, or maybe growled. But this thing moved with a speed that felt unnatural. I stood there for what felt like minutes, my breath caught in my throat, waiting for something to emerge from the trees. But nothing did. The woods went quiet again, except for the wind and my own ragged breathing. I could feel the sweat on my palms, and my legs were shaky. Part of me wanted to run, but I forced myself to keep walking toward the shelter, telling myself it was just an animal, nothing to worry about. I made it to the shelter area, just as full dark set in. There was no one else around, which was disappointing, but at least I was closer to a more open space. I set up my tent again near the shelter, not too close because I didn't want to seem like I was intruding if someone showed up later. The whole time, I kept glancing into the woods, half expecting to see eyes glowing in the dark. My nerves were shot, and every little sound made me jump. A twig snapping, the rustle of leaves. I ate a cold dinner because I was too on edge to start a fire. And then I crawled into my sleeping bag, hoping sleep would come easy. It didn't. I lay there for hours, staring at the roof of my tent, listening to the night sounds. The forest was alive with noises, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the whisper of the wind. But underneath it all, I kept thinking about that crashing sound. Why had it been so fast? Why did it feel like whatever it was ran away from me? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a deer spooked by something else, or a moose, though I've never seen moose in that area. But deep down, I knew it didn't fit. The heaviness of the movement, the speed, it was like nothing I'd ever heard. Eventually, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake. The tent was still dark, and my watch said it was 5:30 in the morning. The sky outside was just starting to lighten, but it was mostly black, with a faint gray hint of dawn. At first, I thought I'd dreamed the noise that woke me, but then it came again, a loud, high-pitched howl that cut through the silence like a knife. It wasn't like any animal I've ever heard. I've camped all over, so I know what coyotes sound like, or wolves, or even bobcats. This was different. It was higher, almost shrill, but with a depth to it that made my bones vibrate. It echoed through the woods, bouncing off the trees, and it sounded close. Too close. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. My hands were trembling, and I clutched the fabric of my bag, trying to steady myself. The howl came from what felt like just a few hundred yards away, maybe to the east of my tent. It lasted for what seemed like forever, rising and falling in this eerie pattern that didn't sound natural. Then, just as it faded, another one answered from farther away. This one was similar but slightly lower, like they were communicating. I held my breath, listening, and the sounds sent chills down my spine. They weren't like dog howls or anything playful. They were primal, raw, and full of something I can only describe as intelligence. It was like they knew I was there. I stayed frozen in my tent, too scared to move or make a sound. My mind raced, trying to place what it could be. A bear? No, bears don't howl like that. Coyotes? Their howls are more yipping and chaotic, not this clear, piercing cry. Wolves, maybe, but I've heard wolf packs before, and this was solitary. Then answered like a call and response. It felt coordinated. The howls came again, one after the other, and each time they seemed to get a little closer. I could hear the rustle of leaves outside, like something big was moving around, but I couldn't see anything through the tent fabric. The air felt thick, and I started sweating even though it was cold inside the tent. My mouth went dry, and I had this urge to pee, but I was too terrified to unzip the tent and step out. The sounds kept up for what felt like an hour, but it was probably only a few minutes. They'd howl, pause, then howl again, and each time the silence afterward was almost worse because I was waiting for the next one. I remember squeezing my eyes shut, praying for it to stop, but it just echoed in my head. At one point I thought I heard heavy footsteps crunching on the ground nearby, but I couldn't be sure. It might have been the wind or my imagination, but the howls were real. They vibrated through the ground and I could feel them in my chest. It was like the forest itself was alive and screaming. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The last howl faded into the distance, and the woods went quiet. Not even the birds were chirping yet. It was like everything was holding its breath. I stayed in my tent, too scared to move for what felt like forever. The sky slowly lightened, and eventually I heard the first birds starting up. But I didn't feel relief. I felt hollow, like I'd been through something I couldn't process. My body was still shaking and my clothes were damp with sweat. When I finally worked up the courage to peek outside, the forest looked normal. Trees, leaves, the path leading away. But it felt different. Like the air was charged with leftover energy. I packed up my gear in a hurry, my hands fumbling with the zippers and straps. I didn't even bother folding my tent properly. I just stuffed it into my pack and started walking back to my car. The whole way, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something following me, but there was nothing. The woods were peaceful again, but the memory of those howls stayed with me. I drove home in a daze, and for days afterward, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those sounds. I've tried to research it since then, looking up animal calls online, but nothing matches. People talk about Bigfoot or Sasquatch howls in forums, and I've listened to recordings. Some of them sound similar, but I don't know what to believe. All I know is that whatever it wasn't any animal I've ever encountered. It's left me with this curiosity that gnaws at me. And sometimes, when I'm in a quiet place, I'll hear an echo of it in my mind. I'll never forget that morning, and I doubt I'll ever go camping alone again. It's just one of those things that happened, and I have no explanation for it. Story 4. That morning, I woke up in the dark, the kind of dark that feels heavy. I'd slept at a little campsite not far from the woods, just a tent and a sleeping bag. The air was cold, the damp kind of cold that gets right into your bones. I remember my breath making clouds in the beam of my flashlight as I packed my gear. I was wearing layers, thermal underwear, a flannel shirt, a thick coat, but I was still shivering. Not just from the cold, but from that feeling you get before something happens, a kind of unease. I shrugged it off. Just pre-hunt jitters, I told myself. I got to my tree stand before first light. It was one of those old metal stands, bolted to a big pine tree about 25 feet up. The climb was always the worst part for me. The rungs were cold and a little slick with morning dew, and my boots would slip sometimes. I remember the sound of the metal creaking under my weight, a sharp, groaning noise that seemed too loud in the quiet. I settled in, got my rifle across my lap, and just waited. That's when the fog rolled in. It wasn't just a little mist. This was a thick, soupy fog, the kind that swallows sound and light. One minute I could see the vague shapes of trees maybe 30 yards out. The next I couldn't see past 10. The world just closed in. Everything went grey and silent. It was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat, a dull thumping in my ears. The only other sound was the occasional drip of water from the pine needles above me. I must have been up there for an hour, maybe more. The sky was starting to get a little less black, but the fog made it feel like dawn was never going to come. I was just staring into that grey wall, trying to pick out a shape, a movement, anything. My fingers were getting numb, even inside my gloves. Then I heard it. At first it was far away, a sound that didn't fit. It wasn't a bird, wasn't a coyote. It was a scream, but not a human scream. This was different, lower, guttural, but with a piercing, high-pitched edge to it that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was a raw sound, like something was being torn apart. It echoed weirdly in the fog, coming from what seemed like every direction at once. I froze, completely. My breath caught in my throat. I remember my hand tightening on the stock of my rifle, my knuckles aching from how hard I was gripping it. I strained my ears, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It stopped for a minute, and the silence that followed was even worse. It was a listening silence. Then it came again, closer this time, much closer. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I lifted my rifle, peering through the scope, but it was useless. The scope just magnified the fog. It was like looking at static. The scream came a third time, and this one was close enough that I could feel it, not just hear it. It vibrated in my chest. It was a sound of pure rage or pain, or both. It was the most terrifying sound I have ever heard in my life, before or since. I was pressed against the tree trunk, trying to make myself as small as possible. I wasn't a hunter anymore. I was prey. I was just a thing hiding in a tree, hoping whatever was out there wouldn't find me. The smell hit me then. I'd been so focused on the sound I hadn't noticed it. It was a musky, thick smell, like a wet dog, but 100 times stronger, mixed with something else, something foul, like old rot and dirt. It was so potent it made my eyes water, and then I heard the footsteps. They weren't light. They were heavy, deliberate thumps on the forest floor. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Slow, like whatever it was just walking, not running, not hurrying. It knew exactly where it was. The sound was moving from my left to my right, coming closer with every step. I couldn't see a damn thing. The fog was a solid wall of grey. I could barely see the ground directly below my stand. The footsteps stopped right under me. I stopped breathing. I swear, my heart stopped too. I was just a statue frozen in absolute terror. I could hear it breathing. It was a low, rumbling sound like air moving through a big pipe. I could smell it so strongly I thought I was going to be sick. That musky, wet fur, rotten stench was everywhere. It felt like it was coating the inside of my nose and my throat. It stood there for what felt like an hour. It was probably only 10 or 15 seconds, but time had stopped. I was waiting for it to reach up and pull me out of the tree. I was waiting for it to shake the stand. I was waiting to die. I remember a single stupid, clear thought cutting through the panic. My wife is going to wonder what happened to me. Then it took a step, then another. The heavy footsteps started again, moving away from my tree, heading off to the east. The sound of its breathing faded. The smell began to lessen just a little. I still didn't move. I stayed frozen, listening as the footsteps got quieter and quieter until they were swallowed by the fog and the silence returned. I don't know how long I sat there. The sky eventually lightened from black to grey, but the fog didn't lift. It was maybe 9 in the morning when I finally felt like I could move my limbs again. They were stiff and cold. My whole body was trembling, a fine, uncontrollable shake. I was terrified to climb down. What if it was waiting for me at the bottom of the tree? What if it was just out of sight, watching? I must have sat there for another 2 hours, just clutching my rifle, scanning the fog for any movement. Finally, the need to get out of there, to be on solid ground, overrode the fear. I climbed down, my legs so weak I almost fell the last few feet. I landed on the soft, wet leaves and immediately spun around, my back to the tree, rifle up, expecting it to come charging out of the mist. Nothing. Just the quiet, foggy woods. I started walking, not even thinking about hunting. I was just walking fast, wanting to get back to my truck. I was maybe a quarter mile from my stand when I heard another sound. A voice, a human voice. "Hey! Hey, over here!" It was another hunter, a guy named Mike, whose stand was about half a mile from mine. I knew him to nod at, that was about it. He was standing by his own tree, and he looked as pale and shaken as I felt. His rifle was dangling from one hand, like he'd forgotten he was holding it. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice tight. "This morning? The screaming?" I just nodded. I couldn't even speak. "My God," he whispered. He ran a hand over his face. "I've been hunting these woods for 20 years. I've never heard anything like that." I was up in my stand, and it sounded like it was right on top of me. We stood there for a minute, 2 grown men, both of us veterans of the woods, looking like a couple of scared kids. The shared fear was a weird comfort. I wasn't crazy. He'd heard it too. "Come look at this," he said, and he led me over to the base of his tree stand. The ground there was a mess. The leaves and pine needles were all matted down in a big area, like something big had been laying there or rolling around, and in the middle of it was hair, a lot of it. It was tangled and matted into the dirt and leaves. It wasn't deer hair. Deer hair is short and fine. This was coarse, thick and dark, almost black. Mike bent down and carefully pulled a few strands free. They were long, I mean really long. The longest ones were maybe 20 inches, like long, coarse human hair. But it wasn't human. It was too thick, too wiry. It smelled too. That same musky, foul smell from under my tree stand. We both just stared at it. We didn't know what to say. We collected some of the hair, putting it carefully into a Ziploc bag Mike had in his pocket. We didn't talk much after that. We just walked back to our trucks together, the fog finally starting to burn off under a weak sun. Later, Mike told me he sent the hair to the University of Georgia, to the experts. They ran their tests, looked at it under their microscopes. A few weeks later, they sent him a letter. They said they couldn't identify it. It didn't match any animal known to be in North America. It was just unknown. I never went back to that specific lease. My buddy, the one who got me the spot, he laughed it off when I told him. Called it a bear with a sore throat, but he never went back there either, not that I know of. And now he's gone, and I'm the only one left who really remembers that morning. The fear is still there, a cold spot in my gut. It's not the fear of being hurt, not really. It's the fear of not knowing, of hearing that scream in the fog, smelling that smell, and knowing with absolute certainty that something was down there that shouldn't exist. Something that walked right under my feet and knew I was there and just chose to let me be. I sit on my porch sometimes at night and look out at the dark trees at the edge of my property, and I think about it. I never saw it. I don't know what it was, but I heard it, I smelled it, and that's enough. That's more than enough. Story 5. The first night we were there, we drove into the little town, if you could even call it that, to grab a beer. The local bar was the kind of place with a stuffed moose head and a smell of old pine and fried food. We were sitting there just shooting the breeze when the bartender, a grizzled guy with a beard that looked like it housed a family of birds, started talking about the locals. I figured he meant the reclusive neighbors. He didn't. He started talking about the big guys in the woods, the ones that walk on two legs. He didn't say the name Bigfoot, not exactly, but he didn't have to. He talked about strange howls, about things moving in the trees that were way too big to be bears. Ed and we just laughed it off. We're not superstitious guys. Ed's an engineer, for God's sake. We chalked it up to local color, something to tell the folks back home. We finished our beers, drove back down the dark, winding road to his house, and that was that. I went to bed thinking it was a funny story. That was Thursday night. Friday morning, everything changed. I woke up at 4 in the morning. Not gradually, not rolling over and squinting at the clock. I woke up like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water on my face. My heart was just hammering in my chest for no reason. The guest room was on the ground floor, and it was pitch black. The kind of black you only get miles from any other light source. I lay there for a second, trying to figure out what had woken me up. Then I heard it. It wasn't a sound I can easily describe. It started low, a deep rumble that I felt in my bones more than heard, and then it rose into this howl. But it wasn't a wolf, wasn't a coyote. Those sounds have a kind of wild music to them. This was different. This was guttural, full of something raw and powerful and deeply, deeply wrong. It was the kind of sound that bypasses your brain and goes straight to the lizard part of your spine, the part that just screams, "Predator." It echoed through the trees for a few seconds and then cut off, leaving a silence that was somehow even more terrifying. My skin was prickling all over. I got out of bed, my feet cold on the wooden floor, and crept to the window. The moon was out, casting this weak, silvery light. I couldn't see anything but the dark shapes of the trees. Then I heard a noise from upstairs, a scratching sound, followed by a low, tense growl. Ed has a cat, a big old Tom that's usually fearless. That's what I thought it was at first. I figured the cat was freaked out by whatever had made that noise. I decided to go upstairs, maybe check on the stupid cat and see if I could spot anything from the big picture window in the living room. The stairs creaked under my feet, each sound impossibly loud in the quiet house. I reached the top, and the living room was dark. The sliding glass door that led out to the deck was there. The blinds were open, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't the cat. Lying flat on its belly on the wooden deck was a cougar, a full-grown mountain lion. Its body was tensed like a spring, every muscle outlined under its tawny fur. Its ears were flat against its head, and it was staring, unblinking, into the tree line at the edge of the yard. It wasn't moving. It wasn't even breathing that I could see. It was just frozen. Prey. My breath caught in my throat. A cougar. On the deck, I'd never seen one that close outside of a zoo, and it was terrified. That was the thing that got me. This was an apex predator, a killing machine, and it was acting like a rabbit that just heard a fox. I backed away slowly, my heart trying to punch its way out of my ribs, and went to Ed's room. I didn't knock. I just pushed the door open and shook him awake. "Ed," I whispered, my voice tight. "Ed, wake up," he grumbled, swatting at my hand. "What? What is it?" "There's a cougar on the deck." That got him up. He sat bolt upright. "What? I'm not kidding. There's a fucking mountain lion on your deck, and it's scared." He didn't question me. He just got out of bed and followed me out of the room. We didn't go to the living room window. That felt too exposed. Instead, we went to a smaller window down the hall, one that looked out onto the same part of the yard but was lower to the ground and had a bush partially blocking the view. It felt safer. We crouched down, peering through the glass. The floodlight on the corner of the house was motion activated, but it hadn't been triggered. The yard was a mix of deep shadows and that pale moonlight. The cougar was still there, a statue of fear. We stared into the woods, trying to see what it was seeing. For a minute there was nothing, just the dark, silent forest. Then Ed grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in. "There," he breathed. I followed his gaze, and I saw them. Two sets of eyes. They were way back in the trees, maybe 50 yards from the edge of the lawn, and they were red, a dull, glowing red like hot coals. They weren't reflecting light, they were producing it, and they were high up, way too high. I'm 6 feet tall, and these things, their eyes had to be 8, maybe 9 feet off the ground. They were far apart from each other, too. One set was a little lower, and as we watched, that one started bobbing. Not a nervous twitch, but a slow, deliberate up and down motion, like the head of whatever it was attached to was ducking and rising. The other set of eyes, the higher one, was swaying slowly from side to side, a gentle, almost hypnotic rhythm. We didn't say a word. We just stared, our faces pressed to the cool glass. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead and trickling down my back, even though the house was cool. My mouth was dry as dust. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't have glowing red eyes. Bears don't stand that tall. Bears don't move like that. The cougar on the deck let out a hiss that was pure, undiluted fury and fear. It was a sound that scraped down my spine, and then the motion-activated floodlight on the side of the house snapped on. It was like a scene from a nightmare, suddenly illuminated. The yard was bathed in this harsh white light. The cougar flinched, but it didn't run. It was still locked on the trees, and then one of them stepped out. It came from the spot where the lower bobbing eyes had been. It didn't rush. It just walked out from between 2 big pine trees and stood at the edge of the grass, right on the border between the light and the shadow. It was enormous. I'm not talking about a big man in a suit. I'm talking about something that defied what I knew about animals. It had to be at least 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall. Its body was covered in hair, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. It was long and shaggy, a dark brownish black, and it looked wet or oily in the light. It was built like a barrel, massively broad across the chest and shoulders, with arms that were too long, hanging down past its knees, but it was the face. I'll never forget the face. It wasn't an ape face. It wasn't a human face. It was something in between, and that made it 1,000 times worse. It had a heavy, protruding brow that shadowed its eyes, but I could still see the deep-set sockets. Its nose was flat and wide. Its jaw was heavy and powerful. It just stood there, completely still, looking at the house, looking at us. I know it saw us. I felt its gaze like a physical pressure. The cougar finally broke. That big cat, a predator that could take down a deer, let out a terrified yowl, scrambled to its feet, and in one fluid, panicked motion leaped off the deck and vanished into the darkness on the other side of the house. It was so scared of this thing that it fled from the relative safety of the deck into the unknown dark. That fact hit me like a truck. This thing, whatever it was, could intimidate an apex predator just by existing. The creature in the yard didn't even seem to notice the cougar leave. It was still staring at the house. Then, from the trees, the second one came out. It was bigger. It burst out of the shadows, not walking but moving with a powerful, loping gait. It didn't stop at the tree line. It ran into the yard, and the first one turned and joined it. And then they were both running. The sound. God, the sound. Their footsteps weren't light or graceful. They were heavy, solid thuds that I could feel through the floorboards. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the pitter-patter of a deer or the shuffle of a bear. It was the sound of immense weight hitting the earth with purpose. They crossed the entire width of the yard, a distance that would take me a good 15 seconds to sprint, in about 3 or 4 of those ground-shaking strides. They moved with a raw, brutal power that was terrifying. They were just dark, hulking shapes, moving faster than anything that big had a right to. And then they were gone, swallowed by the darkness on the far side of the property. The floodlight clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute, and it was worse than the howl, worse than the footsteps. It was a silence that felt watchful. Ed and I didn't move. We stayed crouched by that window for what felt like an hour, just staring into the empty, dark yard. We were both shaking. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. We didn't speak. What was there to say? We had both just seen something that wasn't supposed to be real. Eventually, the sky started to lighten from black to deep blue. We stayed there until the sun was properly up, until the birds started chirping, like it was just another day. Only then did we dare to stand up, our joints stiff and aching from being frozen in one position for so long. We went outside. The morning air was clean and cool. The deck was empty. The yard looked normal, peaceful. Then we walked to the far side, to where they had vanished. The grass was wet with dew, and there, pressed deep into the soil, were footprints. They weren't bear tracks. They were huge, easily 18 inches long and wide. They showed a clear arch and 5 toes. They were so deep, like someone had taken a sledgehammer and stamped it into the ground. We followed the trail for a few yards until the impressions just stopped, right at the base of a dense thicket of young pines. There was no path, no broken branches. They were just gone. We went back to the house and made coffee with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. We didn't talk much. There was nothing to discuss. We had seen it. There was no denying it. Later that day, we went back to that same bar. We sat down, and the bartender came over. He took one look at our faces, at the way we were sitting, all hunched over and quiet, and he just nodded slowly. "See something last night, did you?" he asked, his voice quiet. We told him. We told him about the howl, the cougar, the eyes, the things in the yard. We didn't use any fancy names. We just described what we saw. He listened, and he didn't laugh. He just wiped down the bar with a rag and said, "Yep, that's them, the night walkers. You're not the first, won't be the last." Other guys at the bar, locals, chimed in then. Quiet, matter-of-fact stories about finding strange structures of broken branches, about hearing rocks being knocked together in the middle of the night, about the smell, a god-awful mix of rotten meat and wet dog that sometimes hangs in the air for no reason. They all knew. They all lived with it. Ed sold his house 6 months later. He moved back to the city. He said he couldn't sleep there anymore, couldn't shake the feeling of being watched every time he stepped outside after dark. I went home, back to my normal life. But I'm not the same. I can't walk in a park at dusk without my heart rate picking up. I can't hear a dog bark in the distance without my stomach clenching. I saw something that day that rewired my brain. It showed me that the world is a much bigger, much stranger, and much more terrifying place than I ever wanted to believe. The woods aren't just peaceful, they're ancient, and we're not always at the top of the food chain. There are things out there in the dark, things that walk on 2 legs, and they are real. Story 6. All right, so I've never really shared this with anyone outside my family, but it's been eating at me for a while now, and I figure if I don't get it out, I might just lose my mind. This happened about 5 years ago, back when my brother and I used to go fishing up in Timber Canyon, Utah. It's this rugged, beautiful spot tucked away in the mountains, kind of remote, but not too far from where we lived. We'd been there a handful of times before, always for a weekend trip, but this one day was different. I still get goosebumps just thinking about it. It was a Saturday in early September, I remember, because the leaves were just starting to turn, and there was that crispness in the air that makes you want to be outside all day. My brother and I had packed up our gear the night before. Simple stuff, 2 fishing rods, a cooler with some sandwiches and drinks, and our camping essentials. We left home around 6 in the morning, driving up the winding dirt roads that lead into the canyon. The sun was coming up, casting long shadows through the pine trees, and everything felt peaceful. We were both in good spirits, joking around about who'd catch the biggest trout, that kind of thing. We'd picked a spot near the river where we'd had luck before, a little clearing with a sandy bank and willows thick along the water's edge. We got there around 7, I'd say, and set up our rods right away. The river was running clear and steady, and you could hear the water bubbling over the rocks. It was one of those sounds that just relaxes you. For the first hour or so, everything was normal. We caught a couple of small fish, nothing huge, but it was fun. We were taking turns casting, talking about work and life, just enjoying the quiet. But then, slowly, I started to feel off. It's hard to describe, but it was like this prickle on the back of my neck, like someone was staring at me from the trees. At first, I brushed it off. I thought maybe it was just the wind or my imagination, but it didn't go away. I glanced over at my brother, and I could tell he felt it too. He'd stopped talking mid-sentence and was staring into the woods behind us, his brow furrowed. "You feel that?" he muttered, his voice low. I nodded, not wanting to say much. The air felt heavier somehow, like the silence had weight to it. The birds had stopped chirping, which was weird because earlier there'd been all kinds of noise, squirrels chattering, birds singing. Now it was just the river and this eerie stillness. My heart started beating a little faster, and I had this urge to look over my shoulder every few seconds. We kept fishing, but the joy was gone. It felt like we were being watched, and not in a casual way. It was intense, like whatever it was focused on us. After another 20 minutes or so, we realized we were running low on bait. We'd brought some worms with us, but we'd used most of them, so we decided to dig for more near the riverbank. The soil there is damp and rich, perfect for worms, so we found a spot a few feet from the water and started digging with our hands. I remember the cool, moist dirt under my fingers, the way it smelled earthy and fresh. But as I was crouched down, digging, this wave of fear hit me out of nowhere. My hair literally stood on end. I felt it rise on my arms and the back of my neck. It wasn't cold, the sun was warm on my skin, but I got this chill that made me shiver. I looked at my brother and he was frozen, his eyes wide. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I didn't know what to say. It was like something had passed right by us, or maybe it was just the feeling getting stronger. We both stood up slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, but the feeling was so thick you could almost taste it, metallic, like fear. We decided to pack up and head back to camp. We didn't say much. We just gathered our stuff quickly, our hands shaking a little. The walk back to camp was maybe half a mile through a narrow trail lined with pine trees and brush. Normally, it's a pleasant walk, but that day every sound made me jump. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, it all seemed louder, more menacing. I kept glancing behind us, expecting to see something, but there was nothing. The whole time, that feeling of being watched never left. It was like a shadow hanging over us, and I couldn't shake it. My brother was walking fast, almost jogging, and I matched his pace. We didn't talk about what we felt. We just wanted to get back to the safety of our camp. When we got to camp, it was around noon. We'd set up our tent in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines with a fire pit we'd used before. The sun was high now, casting dappled light through the trees, but the place felt different, tense, like the air before a storm. We dropped our fishing gear by the tent and started getting a fire going, mostly to calm our nerves. I was gathering some dry twigs when I heard a soft crunching sound from the direction of the willows that bordered our camp. Willows are those bushy trees with slender leaves, and they grow thick in patches along the river. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or an elk, since we'd seen them around before, but then I saw movement. I froze, my hand still holding a twig. My brother was across the fire pit, and he saw it too. His face went pale. "Don't move," he mouthed. In the willows, about 50 feet away, there was this thing. It was huge, way bigger than any person or animal I'd ever seen. It was leaning forward, almost like it was peering through the branches, and it moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was unnerving. The willows were swaying slightly as it passed through them, but it wasn't crashing around like a bear would. It was quiet, almost stealthy. I could see patches of dark, matted hair covering its body, and it had broad shoulders that made it look powerful. It was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, and it walked with a slight hunch, like it was trying to stay low. The way it moved was so human-like, but not quite. There was a primal fluidity to it that made my stomach twist. We stood there, completely still, for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears and my breath caught in my throat. The thing paused for a moment, turning its head slightly, and I swear I saw a glimpse of its face. Dark, with deep-set eyes that seemed to absorb the light. It didn't look at us directly, but I felt like it knew we were there. Then it leaned forward again, pushing through the willows, and disappeared into the thicker trees beyond. The whole time, there was no sound except for the rustle of leaves and this low, almost inaudible grunt that vibrated in the air. As soon as it was gone, the spell broke. My brother and I looked at each other, and without a word, we started packing up camp as fast as we could. Our hands were trembling so bad, I could barely zip up the tent. We didn't speak until we were in the truck, driving away, and even then, it was just stunned silence. We never went back to Timber Canyon after that. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear or a trick of the light, but deep down, I know what we saw. And that feeling of being watched, the hair standing on end, it's something I'll never forget. I still don't know what it was, and I doubt I ever will. Story 7. We started around 7 in the evening from this trailhead at about 700 feet elevation. The sky was clear as glass, no clouds, just a blanket of stars and a bright moon hanging over the snow-capped peaks in the distance. It was one of those nights where everything feels still and huge, like the whole world is holding its breath. Bill and I had done this route a bunch of times before, always in daylight, but we wanted to challenge ourselves with a night hike. Stupid, I know, but we felt confident. We had headlamps, extra batteries, and that familiarity that comes from knowing a trail like the back of your hand. The beginning was peaceful, almost magical. The moon lit up the path enough that we didn't need our headlamps right away, just the soft glow on the pine needles and the rocky ground. We were on this steep, narrow trail that cuts through thick forest, all Douglas firs and ponderosa pines, their branches blocking out most of the sky except for little patches where the stars peeked through. I remember the smell, damp earth, pine resin, that clean mountain air that fills your lungs and makes you feel alive. We were chatting low, not about anything important, just keeping each other company, our boots crunching on the gravel and our breathing steady from the climb. It took us about 2.5 hours to reach the summit at 4,300 feet. My legs were burning and I was sweating under my layers, but it was worth it. Up there, the world opened up. We could see for miles, the valleys dark and deep, the peaks glowing under the moonlight like they were made of silver. We found a flat rock to sit on, cracked open some water and snacks, and just soaked it in for what felt like a long time, probably around 90 minutes. It was so quiet, the kind of silence that's not really silent at all. You could hear the wind whispering through the trees, an occasional rustle from some small animal, but nothing else. No cars, no people, just us and the wilderness. I remember feeling small, but in a good way, like we were part of something bigger. But then we started down, taking the easier right-hand trail because we were tired and it was supposed to be less steep. That's when things started to get weird. We'd been descending for maybe 20 minutes when I first saw it. We were on a switchback, and I glanced down into a clearing about 30 or 40 feet below us. Something moved, big and dark, and it was upright, not on all fours. It crossed the open space in a few swift strides, disappearing into the trees on the other side. My heart did this little jump, and I grabbed Bill's arm. "Did you see that?" I whispered. He nodded, but we both shrugged it off. "Probably just a bear," he said, and I wanted to believe him. We've seen bears before, black bears mostly, and they're usually more scared of us than we are of them. But this thing, it moved different, faster, more fluid, like it was built for this terrain. We kept going, but the air felt heavier now. Our jokes died down and we were just listening. Then, a few minutes later, we heard rocks clattering off to our left, like someone was kicking them loose. Not a big slide, just enough to make us stop. Bill shone his headlamp that way, but the beam didn't reach far, just lit up a wall of trees and shadows. Probably a deer or something, he muttered, but his voice was tight. We picked up the pace, and that's when I noticed something was keeping pace with us. Not right beside us, but parallel, maybe 50 feet away through the trees. Whenever we slowed, it seemed to get closer, like it was matching our speed. I could hear it, not footsteps, but these deep rhythmic thumps, like something heavy hitting the ground. Thump, thump, thump. It was steady, almost like a heartbeat, but way too loud to be natural. My skin was crawling now. I could feel the sweat cooling on my back, and my hands were shaking so bad I had to grip my hiking poles tighter. We tried shouting, "Hey! Who's there?" Hoping it was another hiker or maybe a ranger, but nothing. No answer, just that thumping getting faster, like it was responding to our voices. Bill yelled again, and this time the thumps stopped for a second, then started up again, closer. I remember thinking, this isn't right. This isn't a bear. Bears don't move like that, and they don't make sounds like that. We were coming up on another switchback, one that curved sharply to the right, and as we rounded it, we both froze. There, maybe 20 feet ahead, standing in the middle of the trail, was this thing. I don't even know how to describe it without sounding crazy, but I'll try. It was massive, like taller than any man I've ever seen. And I'm not exaggerating. Later, we estimated it was around 12 feet tall, but in that moment, it just felt enormous. But the worst part was the eyes. Two brilliant red eyes, wide apart, and they were locked right on us. They weren't reflecting light like an animal's eyes would. They were glowing like coals in a fire, and they were about 10 feet off the ground. The figure was swaying slightly, like it was breathing heavy, and I could see it was covered in dark, shaggy hair. But in the moonlight, it was just a silhouette of pure bulk. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't move. Bill was next to me, and I heard him gasp. Then, without thinking, he bent down, picked up a rock from the trail and threw it. It wasn't a big rock, maybe the size of his fist, and it hit the thing square in the chest. What happened next? I'll never forget it. The creature let out this roar that wasn't like anything I've ever heard. It wasn't just loud, it was deafening, like a mix between a bear's growl and something primal, and it vibrated through my whole body. I felt it in my bones, in my teeth, like the sound was shaking me apart. The air went cold, and I could see its breath fogging in the moonlight, big plumes of steam puffing out. Then it charged. It moved so fast, covering the distance in seconds. Bill stumbled back, tripped over a root and fell hard. I heard a crack, and he cried out. Later we found out he broke his shoulder. The thing was on him in an instant, looming over him, and it roared again, right in his face. The smell hit me then, like wet dog and rot, so strong it made my eyes water. I don't know what came over me, but I swung my hiking pole, the metal one I always carry, and I hit it in the face. I felt the impact like hitting a tree trunk, and the thing recoiled, screaming. It wasn't a roar this time, it was a high-pitched, almost human scream, but twisted and full of rage. It stumbled back, lost its footing, and tumbled down the slope into the darkness, crashing through bushes and rocks. For a second, everything was silent, except for Bill's groans and my own ragged breathing. Then we heard it, enraged cries from below, fading as it moved away. I didn't wait. I grabbed Bill, hauled him up, and we started running back the way we came, uphill now, which was hell with his injury. He was clutching his shoulder, face white with pain, and I was half carrying him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. We didn't look back, just kept moving, stumbling over roots and rocks, our headlamps bouncing wildly. The cries got quieter, but I could still hear them in the distance, like it was following us, but staying back. The sky started to lighten as dawn broke, streaks of pink and orange cutting through the trees, and that's when we finally reached the trailhead. We collapsed by the parking lot, and that's where this couple found us. They were early hikers, looked confused as hell seeing us there, me covered in dirt and sweat, Bill pale and holding his arm. They helped us to their car, didn't ask too many questions, just drove us to the hospital. Bill got treated for his broken shoulder, and I had some bruises and cuts, but nothing major. The doctors asked what happened, and we said we fell on the trail. What else could we say? But I can't stop thinking about it. That thing was real, and it was huge, like 1,000 pounds of pure muscle and rage. The scale of it. I've seen grizzlies, and this was bigger. It defied everything I know about the woods. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see those red eyes staring back at me, and I feel that vibration from the roar all over again. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will, but it happened, and it's left this mark on me that I can't shake. Story 8. It was July, middle of the month, back in 2012. My buddy and I, we'd been going up to this same little lake in Ontario for years. It wasn't on any fancy map, just a splotch of water we found by accident one year when we took a wrong turn off the main logging road. We called it Stillwater Cove, not because it was on a map, but because that's what it was. Dead still most of the time. This trip was no different. We'd been there since the afternoon, just fishing, drinking a few beers, not talking much. That's how it was with us. We didn't need to fill the air with noise. The silence up there was a thing you could feel, a thick, heavy blanket that soaked up sound. By the time the sun went down, we decided to do some night fishing. The moon was just insane that night. It was a full moon, I'm pretty sure, because it was so bright you could see everything in this weird blue-silver light. You didn't even really need a flashlight. We had a gas lantern, though, one of those hissing Coleman ones, and we had it set up on the floor of the old aluminum boat, casting a warm, wobbly circle of light around us. The boat was maybe 15, 20 feet from the shore. We were anchored in the middle of this small cove, the water black and glassy except for where our lines broke the surface. It was probably past 11, maybe getting close to midnight. I remember my back was starting to ache from sitting on the hard bench seat, and I was thinking about calling it a night, packing it in. That's when I saw the movement. Across the cove, maybe 60, 70 yards away, there was a patch of cattails growing thick along the bank. Something was in there. At first my brain just auto-filled. It's a moose. You see moose up there all the time, wading in the shallows, eating the aquatic plants. But this was different. It was upright. I nudged my buddy with my elbow. He was half dozing, his rod propped on the edge of the boat. "Hey," I whispered, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "Look, over there." We both just stared. The thing was standing in the shallow water, right among the cattails. The moonlight hit it just right, and the details started to come into focus. That's when the first real chill went down my spine. It wasn't a person. I mean, it was shaped like a person, bipedal, but the proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were impossibly wide, like a powerlifter's, but bigger. They just tapered up to this sort of pointed head, and it was covered, head to toe, in what looked like wet, dark hair. It was matted down, slick with water. It was just standing there, perfectly still. The ripples around its legs weren't little waves. They were big, deep swells, like the water was being displaced by something with a lot of mass. It wasn't splashing, it was just pushing the water aside. Then it moved. It took a step, a slow, deliberate step, deeper into the lake. The water was maybe up to its thighs, and with each step, this perfect, silent swell of water would push out from its legs. There was no sound, no sloshing, no crunch of gravel. Just this powerful, quiet displacement. It was the calmest, most controlled movement I've ever seen. It bent forward at the waist, its back still straight, and reached into the black water with these long, long arms. I mean, they hung down past its knees. Easy. It swept its arms back and forth under the surface, slow and methodical, like it was feeling for something on the bottom. I could see the muscles in its shoulders and back bunching and shifting under that dark, wet hair. It was incredibly powerful. You could see the raw strength in it, even from a distance. It wasn't frantic. It was patient, purposeful. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack one. I couldn't swallow. My mouth was desert dry. I looked at my buddy. His face was white as a sheet in the moonlight, his eyes wide open, fixed on the thing. He had one hand clamped over his own mouth, like he was physically stopping himself from making a sound. We were both frozen, not a single thought in my head besides, what the hell is that? It kept feeling around in the water for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a minute or two. Then it just submerged. It didn't dive. It didn't sink. It just leaned forward and slid under the surface as smooth as an otter. There was barely a ripple. For a second, there was nothing, just the dark, moonlit water. Then I saw it. A dark shape, darker than the water around it, gliding just beneath the surface. It was moving fast, way faster than any human could swim. It was like watching a torpedo, but silent. It moved in a straight line, heading for the opposite shore where a big pine tree had fallen into the water, its roots ripped up and pointing at the sky. The shape reached the fallen tree, and then it rose. It didn't climb out. It used one of those long arms, planted its hand on the trunk, and pushed itself upright in one single, fluid, powerful motion. Water streamed off it in sheets. That's when we got the full, terrifying scale of it. It had to be 8 feet tall, minimum. Its chest was massive, like a barrel, and those arms hung down, the hands almost brushing its knees. Its hands, they were wide. I couldn't see fingers clearly, but the shape of them was wrong. They looked like big, dark mitts. It stood there on the bank, water pooling around its feet, and it turned its head. Its head was cone-shaped, wider at the top and narrowing towards the chin. The face was flat. It had a heavy, prominent brow ridge that shadowed its eyes. I couldn't see any whites, just dark pits, and it was looking right at us. It had seen our lantern. My blood went cold. I mean, a physical coldness washed over me, from my scalp down to my feet. This was it. This was the moment in the horror movie where the monster charges. I gripped the side of the boat, my knuckles white. I think I stopped breathing. But it didn't charge. It didn't make a sound. It didn't even change its posture. It just looked at us. It held its gaze for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. There was no anger in its look, no curiosity even. It was just awareness. It knew we were there. It had known probably the whole time, and we were irrelevant. That was the most chilling part. We were so far beneath its concern that we weren't even worth a reaction. Then it turned away. It walked along the shoreline, its gait easy and powerful. Its feet were huge, and I heard them make this soft, wet suction sound as they pulled free from the mud with each step. It moved to another spot along the bank and crouched down, reaching into the water again with one of those long arms, feeling around. It was still going about its business. Whatever it was doing, it wasn't going to let 2 terrified fishermen in a little boat interrupt it. After a minute, it stood back up. There was a fallen log on the bank, one of those big, thick ones. It was chest high on me, easy. This thing just walked up to it, placed one hand on it and stepped over it. It didn't climb, it didn't vault. It was like stepping over a curb. Effortless. It walked into the tree line, and it vanished. That was the second most terrifying part. Something that big, that heavy, should make a racket moving through the woods. It should be snapping branches, crunching leaves. There was almost nothing. A faint rustle, and then the forest was silent again. The normal night sounds, the peepers and the crickets, which had stopped the moment the thing appeared, they stayed silent. The woods were holding their breath. We didn't move, we didn't speak. We sat in that boat for what felt like forever, just staring at the spot where it had disappeared. The lantern hissed. The water lapped softly against the aluminum hull. My body was trembling, a fine, uncontrollable shake that started deep in my core. My buddy finally let out a shaky breath, a sound that was half sob, half gasp. "We need to go," he whispered, his voice cracking. But we couldn't. We were both paralyzed. The thought of getting out of the boat, of walking through the dark to our truck, of having our backs to those woods, it was unthinkable. So we stayed. We sat in that boat, in the middle of that cove, with the moon shining down, until the sky started to turn from black to deep blue in the east. We didn't say a single word to each other. There was nothing to say. When the sun finally peeked over the trees, casting a weak grey light over everything, some of the fear finally loosened its grip. It was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but the raw, primal terror had faded enough for us to function. We pulled up the anchor, my hands fumbling and numb with cold and fear, and I started the little electric trolling motor. The whir of it sounded obscenely loud. We didn't go back to camp. We went straight to the spot where it had stood, where it had climbed out of the water. The mud along the bank was churned up, and there, pressed deep into the soft, wet earth, were the footprints. They were enormous. I wear a size 12 boot, and I put my foot next to one of them. My boot looked like a child's toy. These things had to be 15 inches long and wide, really wide. You could see the outline of the toes, the ball of the foot, the arch. They were pressed so deep, it was like they'd been stamped into the mud by a hydraulic press. The thing must have weighed a ton. And then we saw the handprints. It had put a hand down in the mud when it was crouching by the water. The print was just as big, but longer, more narrow than a human hand. You could see where the palm was, and the impressions of what must have been fingers. Seeing those handprints did something to me. A footprint is one thing. A handprint, that makes it personal. That makes it something that touches the world, that manipulates it. It drove home that this wasn't just some animal. This was a being. We just stood there looking down at the evidence, the proof that we hadn't lost our minds. The air was cold, and I was shivering again, but not from the temperature. It was the aftershock, the sheer, awe-inspiring confirmation of what we had seen. This thing, this being, had moved through deep water with a calm control I can't even describe. It was stronger than anything I've ever seen, stepping over obstacles like they weren't even there. It was aware of us, and it dismissed us. It had a purpose, and it went about it with this terrifying, silent confidence. We packed up our camp in a frantic, silent hurry. We didn't speak the whole drive back to the main road. We didn't speak for most of the 5-hour drive home. What was there to say? Who would believe us? I still go fishing. I still go up to Ontario. But I never went back to Stillwater Cove. I never will. Sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up and see it in my mind, clear as day. That dark, wet shape gliding under the moonlit water, the way it stood up, water sheeting off its massive frame, the way it turned its head and looked at us with those dark, pit-like eyes, and the silence. I always come back to the silence, the sheer, unnatural quiet of something that powerful. I've never told this story to anyone but my buddy, and now you folks. I don't know what it was. I just know what I saw. I know what was left in the mud, and I know that whatever it was, it's still out there, and it doesn't care about us at all. Brain, story 9, Stutkeen. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I think it's time I finally get it out there. I've seen some stuff over the years that just doesn't make sense, and honestly, it still messes with my head when I think about it too much. This happened back in the early 2000s. Around the time we first moved out here to Gunstock Acres in New Hampshire. It's a quiet area, lots of woods and mostly peaceful, or so I thought. But there's this one day that sticks out more than any other, and it's the reason I still can't bring myself to step outside after dark without every single light in the house blazing. It was a crisp fall day. I remember that much. The leaves had turned all shades of red and orange, and the air had that sharp, clean smell you only get up here when summer's fully gone. I was in the living room, just puttering around like I usually do in the afternoons. My oldest son was upstairs doing homework, and the house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I'd settled into the couch with a book, but I wasn't really reading, just kind of staring out the big window that looks out into the woods. That window's been the source of a lot of weirdness over the years, but on this day, everything felt normal. Too normal, maybe. I'd just taken a sip of coffee when I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was a deer. We get plenty of those, and they're bold enough to come right up to the tree line sometimes. But this was different. It was taller, way taller, and it moved in a way that wasn't animal-like, not exactly. It was upright, walking on two legs, but with a kind of heavy, deliberate gait that made the hair on my arms stand up. I froze, my coffee mug halfway to my mouth, and just stared. The thing was maybe 50 yards out, partially hidden by the pines, but I could see it clearly enough. It was dark brown, almost black in the shadows, and covered in what looked like thick, shaggy hair. And it was huge. I'm not great at estimating height, but I'd say it was at least 9 feet tall, maybe more. It didn't seem to notice me at first. It was just moving slowly along the edge of the woods, like it was following some path only it knew. My heart started hammering in my chest, and I could feel this cold sweat break out on my forehead. I've seen some strange things out here since 2001, but this was the first time I'd gotten such a clear, uninterrupted look at it. I remember thinking, this can't be real. But it was. I could see the way its shoulders moved, the way it swung its arms slightly as it walked. It didn't look like a bear or anything else I've ever seen in these woods. Bears don't walk upright for long, and they're not that tall. This thing was built like a person, but on a scale that felt wrong, unnatural. I stayed perfectly still, afraid that if I moved, it might turn and see me. The book slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a soft thud, but I didn't dare pick it up. Then it stopped. Just like that, it froze in place, and its head turned slowly toward the house. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, but I felt this jolt of pure fear shoot through me. It was like being caught in headlights. I couldn't look away, but every part of me wanted to run. My breathing got shallow, and I had to remind myself to breathe slowly so I didn't hyperventilate. The room felt suddenly smaller, like the walls were closing in, and all I could focus on was that dark shape standing there in the trees. A few seconds passed, and then it took a step toward the house, not a aggressive step, just curious maybe. But that made it worse. I've always told myself that it's never threatened us, and that's true. But in that moment, the possibility felt real. I thought about my son upstairs, and my mind raced with what I'd do if it came any closer. Should I call out to him, make noise to scare it off? But I was too scared to move, let alone speak. Then, from upstairs, I heard my son's door open. He must have heard something because he called down, "Mom, you okay?" His voice was casual, but it broke the spell. I glanced away for a second, and when I looked back, the thing was gone. Just vanished into the woods like it had never been there. The spot where it stood was empty, nothing but swaying branches and dappled sunlight. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, and my hands were shaking so bad I had to clasp them together to steady them. "Yeah, I'm fine," I called back, but my voice came out all shaky. I forced myself to stand up and walk to the window, peering out into the woods. Nothing, no movement, no sound, except the wind rustling the leaves. But I knew what I'd seen. My son came downstairs a few minutes later, and I could tell by the look on his face that he'd seen something too. He's always been a calm kid, not prone to exaggeration, but his eyes were wide. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He described it to me, a hairy face with patches of lighter skin, like it was older or something, and how it moved like a person, but bigger, way bigger. Hearing him say it out loud made it all feel more real, and my stomach twisted into a knot. We've talked about this thing before, my son and I. He's seen it a couple of times himself, and we've both heard the noises. Deep grunts that don't sound like any animal I know, screams that echo through the woods at night, and the sound of branches snapping like something heavy is moving through the trees. But this day was different because we both saw it at the same time, and it felt like it was acknowledging us in a way. Not in a friendly way, but not hostile either, just aware. After he went back upstairs, I stayed by the window for a long time, just watching. The sun started to dip lower, casting long shadows across the yard, and the woods began to look darker, more menacing. I kept expecting to see it again, but nothing happened. My mind kept replaying the image of it turning its head, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, watching us back. A couple of hours later, as it was getting toward dusk, I decided I needed to do something to feel in control. I went around the house and turned on every single light. The porch light, the garage light, even the little lamp in the bathroom that faces the woods. I know it sounds paranoid, but it's become a habit since that day. When it's dark out, I can't stand the thought of not being able to see what's out there. My son teases me about it sometimes, but he does the same thing now without even thinking. As night fell, the woods got quieter, but that's when the sounds usually start. Around 9 o'clock I heard it, a low grunt like something big and heavy was breathing close by. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, and I froze with my hands in the soapy water. My heart jumped into my throat, and I had to grip the edge of the sink to steady myself. The grunt came again, followed by the distinct sound of a branch snapping like something had stepped on it. It was close, maybe just beyond the tree line. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I crept back to the living room window, keeping the lights off so I could see out better. The yard was lit up by the porch light, casting a yellow glow that didn't reach far into the woods. At first, I didn't see anything, just darkness and shadows. Then I noticed movement, a large, dark shape shifting between the trees. It was back. My breath caught, and I could feel my pulse thumping in my ears. This time, it seemed to be pacing, moving back and forth along the edge of the woods, like it was restless or something. I stood there for what felt like forever, just watching it. My legs started to ache from standing so still, but I was too scared to move. Every time it passed through a patch of light, I got a better look at it. The hair was matted and dark, and I could see the sheer size of it, how it towered over the underbrush. It didn't make any aggressive moves toward the house, but its presence alone was enough to fill me with dread. I kept thinking, what if it decides to come closer? What if it's not as harmless as I've convinced myself? At one point, it stopped and let out this sound. Not a grunt this time, but something between a scream and a roar. It was loud, echoing through the night, and it made the windows vibrate slightly. I jumped back from the window, my heart racing, and I heard my son come running downstairs. "What was that?" he asked, his voice tight with fear. I just shook my head because I didn't have an answer. We stood there together in the dark, listening as the sound faded away, replaced by an eerie silence. The rest of the night was tense. We didn't see it again, but we heard more branches breaking and occasional grunts, like it was circling the property. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat on the couch with all the lights on, staring out the window and jumping at every little noise. My son stayed up with me for a while, but eventually he fell asleep on the floor, and I covered him with a blanket. I felt this overwhelming need to protect him, but also this helplessness because I didn't know what we were up against. When morning finally came, the woods were quiet again. The sun rose, and everything looked normal. Birds chirping, dew on the grass, like nothing had happened, but I knew better. I went outside later that day, once the sun was fully up, and walked toward the tree line. I didn't go far, just enough to see if there were any signs. And there were, large footprints in the soft ground near the edge of the woods. They were huge, bigger than any boot print I've ever seen, and shaped like a human foot, but wider with deep impressions. In the winter, we've seen these in the snow, and they fill in quickly, like whatever made them is heavy enough to compress the snow deeply. Seeing those footprints made it all real again. I stood there for a minute just staring at them, and I felt this chill run down my spine. This wasn't some story or imagination. This was something physical, something that left marks. I've never been able to explain it, and I probably never will. We still see it from time to time, and we still hear the noises. But that one day was the worst, because it felt like a line had been crossed, like it knew we were watching, and it didn't care. To this day, I can't go out at night without all the lights on, and I still get that knot in my stomach when I hear a branch snap in the woods. Whatever it is, it's out there, and I don't think it's going away. I just hope it never decides to come any closer. Story 10. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, not sure if I should even talk about it, but I can't get it out of my head. I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here will believe me or have had something similar happen. This was in Oregon, back in early October, a couple of years ago. I was out scouting for elk, something I've done since I was a kid with my dad. It's kind of a tradition, you know, getting up before the sun, heading into the woods, just me and the quiet. That morning, I woke up around 4 in the morning, threw on my camo gear, packed my binoculars and a little backpack with water and snacks, and drove out to this spot I know near the Umpqua National Forest. It's not too far from where I live, maybe an hour's drive, but once you're out there, it feels like another world. The air was crisp that day, with that damp, earthy smell you only get in the Pacific Northwest, like pine needles and wet soil. I remember my breath fogging up in the cold as I parked my truck off this old logging road. I didn't see anyone else around, which was normal for that time of year. Most hunters weren't out yet, so it was just me and the wildlife. I started hiking in while it was still dark, using a small headlamp to see the trail. My plan was to get to this ridge where I'd seen elk sign before, droppings, scrapes on trees, that kind of thing. As the sky started to lighten, I turned off the headlamp and let my eyes adjust. The stars were fading, and the first hints of pink and orange were bleeding into the horizon. It was peaceful, you know, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. I reached the ridge just as the sun was peeking over the trees. Daylight was coming fast, casting long shadows through the firs and cedars. I found a good spot to settle in, behind a fallen log covered in moss, and pulled out my binoculars. They're nothing fancy, just a pair of Nikon ones I've had for years, but they do the job. I started scanning the area slowly, looking for movement or any sign of elk. Below me, there was this dirt road that cuts through the forest. It's mostly used by loggers or the occasional hiker, but that early, it was empty. I was focused on a clearing to the left when I caught something out of the corner of my eye. Movement on the road. At first I thought it might be a deer or maybe a bear, since we get black bears around there, but it was too coordinated, I guess. I swung the binoculars over to get a better look. The light was still low, so it took a second for my eyes to focus, and that's when I saw them. 2 figures, maybe 100 yards away, moving along the dirt road. They were about 5.5 feet tall, I'd say, and covered in long brown hair that looked matted and shaggy, like it hadn't been cleaned in a while. At first, my brain tried to make them into bears. I've seen plenty of bears, and they can stand up sometimes, so that's where my mind went. But these things weren't walking on all fours. They were upright, on 2 legs, and they were playing, like actually playing. One would chase the other, then they'd stop and slap hands, almost like kids messing around. It was so casual, so normal, that for a split second I almost laughed. But then it hit me. Bears don't do that. Bears don't slap hands or run after each other like that. Their proportions were all wrong, long arms that swung as they moved, and their bodies seemed leaner, more human-like, but not quite. The hair covered everything, so I couldn't see faces clearly, but they had a sort of hunched posture, like they were powerful but agile. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tightened my grip on the binoculars, my hands getting sweaty. I didn't move, didn't even breathe, just watched. They were chasing each other in circles, making these low, grunting sounds that carried through the quiet morning. Not loud, but enough to hear if you were listening. It wasn't aggressive. It was playful, like how dogs or kids roughhouse. One of them would dart forward and the other would spin around and swat at it, and they'd both kind of bounce back. The slapping sound was dull, like flesh hitting flesh, but muffled by the hair. I remember thinking how weird it was that I could hear it from that distance. The forest was so still. Everything else was silent. No birds, no wind, just them. Then, as suddenly as they'd started, they stopped. Both of them froze mid-motion, like they'd heard something or sensed me. My blood went cold. I was hidden pretty well, but I felt exposed, like they were looking right at me. They didn't turn their heads. I couldn't see their faces well enough to tell, but they stood there for what felt like forever, just still. Then, without a sound, they turned and walked side by side into the trees. Not running, not hurrying, just walking calmly, like they'd done it 1,000 times. One moment they were there, and the next they were gone, swallowed up by the undergrowth. I stayed frozen behind that log for I don't know how long. My legs were trembling, and I had this cold sweat all over my body. I lowered the binoculars slowly, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped them. I kept staring at the spot where they'd disappeared, half expecting them to come back, but nothing happened. The forest stayed quiet, no more sounds, no movement. It was like they'd never been there. But I knew what I saw. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Bears? No, bears don't move like that, don't have those proportions. Their arms were too long, their strides too smooth, and the way they played, it was too human, but not human either, nothing I'd ever seen or heard of. I finally forced myself to move, crawling back from the log and sitting up. My heart was still hammering and I felt dizzy, like I'd been holding my breath for too long. I looked around, scanning the trees with my naked eyes, but there was nothing. Just the same old forest, now feeling a lot darker and more menacing. I thought about getting out of there, but my legs felt like jelly. I sat there for what felt like hours, but it was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. The sun was fully up now, casting light through the canopy, but it didn't feel warm anymore. Everything felt wrong. I started packing up my stuff, my hands fumbling with the zippers on my backpack. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something, but it was just trees and shadows. As I stood up, my knees buckled and I had to grab the log to steady myself. That's when the fear really set in. Not just shock, but this deep, gut-level terror. What if they were still nearby? What if they were watching me? I've been in the woods my whole life, faced bears and cougars, but this was different. This was something unknown, something that shouldn't exist. I decided to head back to my truck, but I didn't take the direct route. I circled around, keeping to thicker cover, moving as quietly as I could. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. Every snap of a twig had my heart in my throat. I kept replaying what I saw in my head. The way they moved, the slapping hands, the sudden stop. It was so vivid, so real. I remembered hearing stories from friends about weird sightings in Washington, up near the Cascades, people talking about big, hairy creatures in the woods, but I'd always brushed it off as tall tales or misidentified animals. Now I wasn't so sure. When I finally reached my truck, I practically threw myself inside and locked the doors. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, trying to calm down. My hands were still shaking, and I had to grip the steering wheel to steady them. I drove home in a daze, not really paying attention to the road. All I could think about was those two figures and how they'd just vanished. I didn't tell anyone at first. Who would believe me? But it stuck with me, and sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night remembering it. That day changed how I see the woods. I still go out scouting, but I'm more cautious now, always looking over my shoulder, and every time I hear about a sighting in Washington or somewhere else, I think back to that morning and wonder. I don't know what they were, and I probably never will, but I know what I saw wasn't a bear or anything else I can explain. It's just there in my memory, clear as day, and it still gives me chills. Story 11. We lived out in Palm Harbor, Florida, on County Road 70. It wasn't the middle of nowhere, but it wasn't suburbia either. We had a decent chunk of land, mostly scrubby Florida flatland, with a thick line of woods at the back of the property. The house was a simple ranch style, and my dad had strung up these big, powerful floodlights on each corner of the house. They were meant for security, but mostly we used them for nights like this one. It was rabbit season. The rabbits were a nuisance, chewing through my mum's vegetable garden before she passed, and even after, my dad kept up the war against them. It was our thing. We'd go out after dark with the .22 rifles. The floodlights would light up most of the yard, but the edges, especially near the tree line, were pools of deep shadow. That's where the rabbits would come out, their eyes glowing in the dark before they'd hop into the lit grass. So that Friday evening, it was just me and him. The air had that first hint of coolness that you get in a Florida October, a relief after the brutal summer. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't sticky anymore. You could breathe. The bugs weren't as bad. I remember the smell of the air, damp earth, cut grass from earlier in the day, and a little bit of gasoline from the lawnmower he'd just put back in the shed. We were standing on the back concrete patio. The floodlights were on, casting these long, stark shadows from the oak trees. It was bright right around the house, but the light just sort of died about 50 feet out, swallowed by the darkness of the property and the wall of trees beyond. I had my flashlight, a big, heavy metal one with fresh batteries. My job was to scan the edges with the beam while my dad stood ready with his rifle. I was just a kid, but he trusted me to be his spotter. I was sweeping the flashlight beam along the western tree line, the one that ran along the old fence. It was a slow, methodical sweep, left to right. I was looking for those little pairs of shining eyes. The world was quiet, just the usual nighttime sounds. Crickets, the distant hum of a generator from a neighbor's place, the leaves rustling in a slight breeze. Then I saw movement. It wasn't a rabbit. It was too big, and it was low to the ground. My beam caught it for just a second, and I thought maybe it was a deer that had bedded down for the night. I kept the light on the spot, my finger off the trigger of the rifle I was holding loosely. The beam was shaky because my hands were never that steady. The thing was crouched, hunched over, right at the edge where the mowed grass met the tangled underbrush of the woods. It was in the shadows, but the outer edge of the floodlights reached it, and my flashlight beam was right on it. It was a dark shape, a deeper black against the dark trees, and then it moved. It didn't stand up slowly. It didn't get up like a person stretching or a bear rising on its hind legs. It sprang. It was this unbelievably fast, powerful uncoiling of its body. 1 second it was a crouched heap, and the next it was fully upright. The motion was so fluid and so quick it didn't seem real. It was like watching a video played on fast forward, and now it was standing there facing away from me towards the woods. My brain was trying to catch up, to process what I was seeing. It was tall as my dad, who was 6 feet even. But that's where the similarity ended. Its shoulders were immense. They were huge, rounded masses of muscle that sloped down into thick, powerful arms. Its legs were like tree trunks, with massive thighs that strained against what? I couldn't see pants. I saw hair. It was covered in hair, not fur like a dog, but a thick, shaggy coat of it. In the mixed light of the floodlights and my flashlight, it looked brownish, a dirty, dark brown. It was matted in places. My eyes traveled up its back to its head, and that's when the real ice water hit my veins. Its head was tilted, not just a little. It was cocked at a sharp, unnatural angle to the left, like its neck was permanently bent. It wasn't looking around. It was just fixed in that crooked position on its shoulders. I remember thinking, with a clarity that was terrifying, that it looked like an old injury, like something had broken its neck a long time ago, and it had just healed wrong. I was frozen, completely and utterly paralyzed. It wasn't a choice. My body just stopped working. My lungs forgot how to pull in air. My heart felt like it had seized in my chest. My fingers were locked around the flashlight and the rifle stock. I couldn't even blink. I was just staring at this thing, this impossible thing standing at the edge of my backyard. It only stood there for a couple of seconds. It was so quiet. The crickets had stopped. Everything had stopped. The world was holding its breath. Then it took a step, then another, and then it was running. It didn't run like a man. Its gait was heavy, powerful, a kind of loping sprint that ate up the ground. It vanished into the blackness of the woods in 3, maybe 4 strides. The sound wasn't footsteps. It was more of a heavy, rustling crush as it plowed through the brush, a sound that faded almost instantly into the distance. The moment it disappeared, the spell broke, but not in a good way. A wave of pure, undiluted terror washed over me so hard I felt dizzy. I still couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I tried to make a sound, to yell for my dad, but my throat was closed tight. All that came out was a dry, strangled squeak. I heard my dad's voice then, but it sounded like it was coming from another room, through water. "You see one?" he asked, thinking I'd spotted a rabbit. I couldn't answer. I just stood there, rigid, my eyes glued to the spot where the thing had vanished. That's when we both heard it. From deep in the woods, a series of frantic, high-pitched barks. Dogs, the Johnson's hounds, a few properties over. They weren't just barking, they were going insane. The kind of barking they do when something has them truly terrified or enraged. It was a chaotic, desperate sound that cut through the night. My dad must have heard the fear in their barks, or maybe he finally saw the state I was in. He was at my side in an instant. "What? What is it?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. I managed to turn my head a fraction. My neck muscles were so tight it hurt. I just pointed a trembling finger towards the tree line. He looked where I was pointing, then back at me. He didn't see anything, but he saw me. He saw the sheer, unthinking terror on my face. I wasn't a kid who scared easy. I'd been in fights. I'd fallen out of trees. I'd dealt with snakes. He knew this was different. He didn't ask any more questions. He grabbed me by the arm, his grip like iron. Inside now. He pulled me, and my legs were like wood. I stumbled, and he half dragged me across the patio, through the screen door, and into the kitchen. He slammed the door shut and locked it. Something we almost never did. He went through the house, checking the front door, the windows, pulling curtains shut. The whole time, he had his rifle in his hand. I collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table. I was shaking uncontrollably. My teeth were chattering. I felt cold deep in my bones, despite the warm evening. I couldn't get the image out of my head. The way it sprang up, the sheer size of it, and that horrible tilted head. My dad came back into the kitchen and sat down across from me. He put his rifle on the table. "Okay," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Tell me what you saw. Exactly what you saw." The words came out in a jumble. A creature, big, hairy, shoulders. It stood up. It ran, the tilted head. I kept circling back to the head. Its head was crooked, Dad, like it was broken. He listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving my face. He was a practical man, a mechanic. He dealt with things he could see and touch and fix, but he also knew I wasn't a liar. And he knew what real fear looked like. After I finished, he was quiet for a long time. We just sat there in the bright fluorescent light of the kitchen, the normalcy of the room, the checkered tablecloth, the smell of coffee from earlier felt alien and wrong. "Stay here," he said finally. He went back outside. I watched from the window as he walked across the yard, his own flashlight beam cutting through the night. He went right to the spot I'd pointed to. He knelt down. I saw him run his hand over the grass, then he looked at the brush at the tree line. He was down there for a few minutes. When he came back inside, his face was grim. He looked older. "The grass is matted down," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "And the bushes." Something big pushed its way through, snapped branches, thick ones. We looked at each other. There was nothing else to say. He went to the phone, the old rotary one on the wall in the hallway. I listened to him dial. He talked to the sheriff's department. I heard him say our address, that we'd seen something on the property, something large, an animal, maybe a bear. He was hesitant. I could hear it in his voice. He didn't say a tall, hairy man with a crooked neck. He said a large animal. He didn't explain fully. What was he going to say? The dispatcher probably just wrote down possible bear sighting. A deputy came out about 20 minutes later. A young guy. He shone his flashlight around the yard, looked at the disturbed brush. He agreed it looked like an animal had been through there. "Probably a bear," he said. The same thing my dad had said on the phone. "They're getting more bold these days. You folks just keep your doors locked." He left, and that was it, the official response. We didn't go back outside that night. We sat in the living room with the TV on, but neither of us was watching it. Every little sound from outside made us jump. The house, which had always felt like a safe fortress, felt thin and vulnerable. Months went by. Life went back to normal on the surface, but I never went rabbit hunting at night again. I was nervous even taking the trash out after dark. I'd find myself staring at the tree line, my heart in my throat, expecting to see that dark shape again. Then one day the following spring, my dad called me into the kitchen. He had the local newspaper open. He pointed to a small article in the back. It was about Bigfoot sightings. A few people in the next county over had reported seeing a large, hairy, bipedal creature in the woods. The article treated it as a curiosity, a joke almost. We read it in silence. When we finished, my dad looked at me. "Did any of them mention the head?" he asked quietly. I scanned the article again. "No," I said. "Just that it was big and hairy." He just nodded and folded the paper back up. That was the only time we ever acknowledged what it might have been. We never said the word Bigfoot out loud. It sounded too crazy, but we both knew the height, the shoulders, the hair, the way it moved. It fit. But the head tilt, that was the part that stuck with me, that still haunts me, that deformed posture. It wasn't just some monster from a story. It was an individual. It had a history. It had, at some point, gotten hurt. That little detail made it real in a way that was so much more terrifying. It wasn't a mythical beast. It was a living thing, a broken thing, that had been standing at the edge of my yard on a Friday evening in October. And sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night, all these years later, I can still see it so clearly, the way it sprang up, the immense silhouette against the trees, and that head forever tilted to the left, frozen in that one moment of shocking, paralyzing terror. I never saw it again. I never found an explanation that made any more sense than the one I'm too scared to say out loud. It was just there, and then it was gone, and it left me with a fear that never really went away. Ishwa. Story 12. The road home is this winding two-lane highway, Route 92, that cuts through a long stretch of the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. During the day, it's beautiful. At night, it's a different beast entirely. There are no streetlights out there, none. Your headlights are the only thing carving a tunnel through this absolute wall of black. And outside of that tunnel, it's just nothing. The kind of nothing that feels like it's watching you. My car's an old Jeep Cherokee, not the most quiet ride, and the heater was fighting a losing battle against the chill that had settled in. I had the radio on low. just some talk station from Seattle that was fading in and out with static. I was tired, my eyes were a little gritty, and I was just focusing on the yellow line, following the curves. My mind was on dumb stuff. What I had to do at work, a bill I needed to pay, the usual late-night mental chatter. I was coming up on this one particular curve, a real sharp one that's marked with a yellow warning sign with a squiggly arrow on it. I've driven it 100 times. You slow down, you take it easy, because there's a deep ditch on the right-hand side that drops off steeply into a mess of ferns and salal bushes. As I started into the turn, my headlights swept across the road, and then, as they do, they swung out and lit up the ditch. And that's when I saw it. At first, my brain just registered person. Someone's in the ditch. My foot instinctively lifted off the gas a little, a jolt of concern and confusion hitting me. What the hell is someone doing out here? It's the middle of nowhere. But in the split second it took for that thought to form, the headlights fully illuminated the figure, and my brain just broke. It wasn't a person. It was crouched down, low to the ground, with one massive arm braced on the earth for support. The shoulders were impossibly wide, like a professional linebacker times 3. They just erupted from its body, a solid shelf of muscle and fur. It was covered in this dark, shaggy fur, but it wasn't like a bear's. It was longer, almost ragged in places, and it had a weird coppery sheen where my headlights hit it. Its head was set low, like it had no neck at all, just this powerful hump of its back, leading into a heavy, rounded skull. The terror, the real heart-stopping ice water in the veins terror, happened when it turned its head towards me. The movement wasn't fast, it was deliberate, powerful. Its head rotated, and those eyes, they caught the light. They weren't the bright demonic red you see in movies. They were a dull, glowing orange, like hot coals, or the embers of a dying fire. They held no expression I could recognize, just this ancient, flat kind of awareness, and below them, its face. It was human-like, but all wrong, like a clay sculpture that had been made by someone who'd only heard a description of a human face. The brow ridge was massive, a heavy shelf of bone overhanging its eyes. The nose was flat and wide. I couldn't really make out a mouth. It was just a dark line in the shadow of its snout-like face. Time didn't slow down, it just solidified. I was trapped in that single horrifying moment. My hands were locked on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, my knuckles white. I could feel the cold, textured plastic of the wheel digging into my palms. I could hear the hum of my engine, the whine of the tires on the asphalt, and my own breath, which had become a shallow, ragged thing in my throat. I could smell the faint scent of pine from the air freshener and the old coffee in my cup holder. I didn't stop. Stopping wasn't even a thought that entered my mind. The part of my brain that handles self-preservation screamed at me to just keep moving, to get past it, to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing in the ditch. My foot, which had been hovering over the brake, instead pressed down gently on the gas. I didn't speed away, I just maintained my momentum, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. As I passed it, my side mirror gave me a new, even more terrifying perspective. I saw it rise. It uncoiled from its crouch with a fluid, terrifying grace. It was so fast. 1 second it was a hunched-over mass in the ditch. The next it was standing upright. The ditch that had looked deep and shadowy a moment before was now suddenly shallow. This thing towered over it. It must have been 8, 9 feet tall. Easily. Its upper body, those monstrous shoulders, just loomed over the road. The top of its head was above the level of my Jeep's roof. I saw the sheer bulk of it. The way its fur-covered back was wider than any man I've ever seen. And then I was past it. The curve straightened out, and the thing was behind me. I didn't look back again. I stomped on the gas. The Jeep's engine roared, a sound I'd never heard it make before, and the force shoved me back into my seat. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, painful drumbeat. I could feel a cold sweat break out all over my body, under my arms, on my back, my forehead. My mouth was so dry it felt like it was full of sand. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see those orange eyes glowing in the darkness behind me, or worse, to see it loping after the car with those long, powerful strides I knew it had to be capable of. But there was nothing. Just the empty black road being swallowed by the night. The rest of the drive home is a blur of pure, undiluted fear. Every shadow at the side of the road was a threat. Every tree stump looked like a crouching figure. I drove with my high beams on, my eyes scanning the tree line constantly, my body so tense it was starting to ache. I didn't turn the radio back on. The silence in the car was deafening, and I was afraid any sound would cover up a noise from outside, the sound of something following me. I kept replaying the image in my head, the way the light shone on its fur, the exact shade of orange in its eyes, the sheer, impossible width of its shoulders, the way it didn't run or snarl. It just watched me. It turned and looked, and it saw me. That feeling, the feeling of being seen by something that was so clearly not human, is something I can't shake. It's a primal feeling, a deep down in your bones kind of fear. It's the fear a mouse must feel when it locks eyes with an owl. I finally got to my neighborhood. The familiar streets with their porch lights and parked cars should have been a comfort, but they weren't. They just felt flimsy, like a stage set that could be torn down at any moment. I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine. For a full minute, I just sat there, listening for footsteps, for heavy breathing, for the snap of a twig. Nothing. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the house key between my fingers. I practically fell out of the car, slammed the door shut, and ran for my front door. I jammed the key in the lock, twisted it, and threw myself inside, immediately slamming the deadbolt home and engaging the chain. I stood there for a long time, my back against the door, just breathing. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I went through the whole house, turning on every single light. The kitchen, the living room, the bathrooms, the closets. I checked the locks on all the windows twice. I pulled the curtains shut, my eyes darting to the darkness outside between the gaps. I kept expecting to see a massive dark shape standing in my backyard, those orange eyes fixed on my window. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch in the brightly lit living room, a baseball bat on the cushion next to me, and just stared at the front door. Every little noise from the house settling made me jump. The image of that thing rising up from the ditch was burned onto the back of my eyelids. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The next morning, in the harsh, rational light of day, I tried to talk myself down. A bear? It wasn't a bear. I've seen bears. Their eyes don't glow orange like that, and they don't stand up and loom over a road ditch with shoulders like a damn refrigerator. A person in a costume? Out in the middle of the national forest on a cold Tuesday night, crouched in a ditch? It makes no sense. The scale was all wrong. The sheer size of it was beyond anything human. I've never driven that road after dark again. I'll take a 20-minute detour to avoid it. It's been months now, but it hasn't faded. If anything, the memory has gotten sharper, more detailed. I can still feel the texture of my steering wheel. I can still smell the pine air freshener. I can still see the exact way the headlights lit up the individual clumps of that dark, coppery fur. I don't know what it was. I don't use the name everyone else uses. It feels disrespectful, and more than that, it feels inadequate. That name belongs to campfire stories and blurry videos. What I saw wasn't a story. It was real, it was physical, it was powerful, and it saw me. The worst part, the thing that keeps me up some nights even now, isn't just the sight of it. It's the feeling that came with it. The feeling of being looked at by something that doesn't belong in our world, something old and wild and utterly indifferent to me, but which, for one brief moment, decided to acknowledge my existence. I was just a blip of light and noise passing through its territory, and it turned its head. It looked. And in that look, I felt 1,000 years of wilderness, an intelligence I can't comprehend, and a strength that could tear my car apart like tissue paper. I was just driving home. This Story 13. Okay, so I've never really posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for a while now. I still don't know what to make of it, and honestly, I'm shaking a little just typing this. It happened on my family's property, a place I've known my whole life. Or thought I did. I'm gonna try to tell it exactly like it happened. No fluff, just what I saw and felt. It was one day, a single afternoon and evening that flipped everything I knew upside down. I was camping alone out there, which wasn't unusual for me. My family owns this chunk of land up in the woods, mostly spruce and pine trees everywhere, and it's pretty isolated. There's this steep slope that rises up behind the clearing, covered in thick trees, and at the base, all that's left of an old cabin is a concrete slab. It's where we used to have family gatherings when I was a kid, but now it's just this lonely spot with memories. I decided to spend the weekend there, just to unwind and get away from everything. I drove out in my beat-up truck with my 2 dogs, Max and Buddy. They're both big mutts, usually fearless, the kind that'll bark at anything that moves but never back down. That day, I got there in the early afternoon. The sun was out, but under the trees, it was already kinda dim and cool. I set up my camp near the concrete slab because it's flat and dry. I have a small trailer I tow behind the truck for these trips. Nothing fancy, just a basic pop-up with a bed and a little table. It's old, but it does the job. I spent a couple hours doing chores, gathering firewood, setting up the campfire ring, and unpacking my gear. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, and it was quiet except for the occasional bird chirping or the rustle of leaves. I remember feeling really relaxed, like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. After I finished up, I decided to just sit and read for a bit. It was around 6 in the evening. The light was starting to fade, casting long shadows through the trees. I had a book with me, some thriller novel, and I was sitting in a camp chair near the trailer, with Max and Buddy lying at my feet. They were dozing off, and everything felt peaceful. I'd just turned a page when I heard it, a sharp crack that echoed through the woods. It wasn't a small twig snapping, this was loud, like a big branch breaking under a lot of weight. The sound came from up the slope, maybe 50 yards away, and it made me jump. My heart started thumping right away, and I put my book down. Before I could even process it, a commotion erupted from behind this old shed we have on the property. The shed's about 35 feet from where I was sitting, kind of tucked into the trees, and it's where we store gas cans and some tools. All of a sudden, I heard gas cans clattering, like something had knocked them over, and then this crashing sound through the brush, like whatever it was moving fast. It stopped as quick as it started, and the woods went dead silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. That's when the fear really started to set in. I stood up, my legs feeling wobbly, and that's when I noticed Max and Buddy. They were both on their feet, but they weren't barking or growling like they usually do when they hear something. Instead, they were trembling, whining low in their throats, and they backed up against the trailer door, their tails tucked between their legs. I'd never seen them like that before. These dogs have chased off bears and coyotes without a second thought, but now they were scared shitless. That freaked me out more than the sounds did. If they were that scared, something was really wrong. Then it hit me. This overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't just a vague sense. It was palpable, like a weight on my skin. I could feel eyes on me from close by, maybe from the trees near the shed or the slope, but when I looked, I didn't see anything. The shadows were getting deeper, and the woods felt dense and dark, like they were hiding something. My skin prickled, and I had this cold sweat break out on my back. I kept scanning the area, turning slowly, but there was nothing moving. No shapes, just stillness. But the feeling was so intense, it made the hair on my arms stand up. I didn't wait around to find out what it was. I backed toward the trailer, keeping my eyes on the trees, and grabbed the dogs by their collars. They didn't resist. They just pressed against me, still whining. I fumbled with the trailer door, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the latch open. Once we were inside, I slammed it shut and locked it. The trailer is small, so we were all crammed in there, me on the bed, the dogs huddled at my feet. I pulled the curtains closed, but I left a tiny crack to peer out, my heart racing so hard I could feel it in my throat. For what felt like hours, I just sat there, listening. The woods were quiet again, but every now and then I'd hear something, a soft crunch on the pine needles outside, like footsteps. Not loud, but deliberate, like something was pacing slowly. It would start and stop, never getting closer to the trailer, but always there. I kept hoping it was a deer or something, but deer don't snap branches that big, and they don't scare my dogs like that. Plus, the footsteps sounded too heavy for a deer. They had a rhythm to them, like whatever it was knew I was in here. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was probably just an animal, but my mind kept going back to stories I'd heard from other people in the area. There've been rumors for years about things in these woods, big shadowy figures, strange sounds, that kind of stuff. I never put much stock in it, but now it was all I could think about. I felt a knot in my stomach, and my breathing was shallow. Every time I heard another footstep, I'd freeze, waiting for it to come closer, but it never did. It was like whatever was out there was just waiting or watching. The dogs didn't settle down either. They stayed pressed against the door, their ears perked up, and every so often they'd let out a low growl, but it was more fearful than aggressive. I remember hugging my knees, feeling the cold metal of the trailer wall against my back. The air inside was stuffy, but I was too scared to open a window. I kept checking my phone, but there's no service out there, so I couldn't call anyone. I just had to sit and wait it out. As it got darker, the sounds tapered off, but that feeling of being watched never went away. It was like a presence hanging over the place, something I couldn't shake. I must have sat there for another hour or two just listening, until I finally heard the sound of a car engine in the distance. My cousin was supposed to come by later to check on me, and relief washed over me when I recognized the sound of his truck pulling up the dirt road. But even then, I didn't move right away. I waited until I heard him call out my name before I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The second I opened the door, the dogs bolted out, but they didn't run off. They just stayed close, sniffing the air and whining. My cousin asked me what was wrong, and I tried to explain, but my words came out jumbled. I pointed to the shed and the slope, telling him about the branch snapping and the commotion. But when we looked around, there was nothing there, no tracks, no broken branches we could see in the dark, just the gas cans tipped over behind the shed. He helped me straighten them up, and we built a fire, but I couldn't relax. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept feeling like those eyes were still on me, even with him there. We stayed up for a while, talking in low voices, and eventually I packed up my stuff and left with him. I didn't spend the night like I'd planned. Driving away, I looked back at the property, and it didn't feel familiar anymore. It felt like a different place, one with secrets I didn't want to know. That was months ago, and I haven't been back since. I still think about it all the time, the sound of that branch snapping, the way my dogs reacted, that intense feeling of being watched. I can't explain what it was, and I don't think I ever will. It's just one of those things that sticks with you, changing how you see the world. I used to love those woods, but now they give me chills. Whatever was out there that day, it felt too big, too smart, and too close for comfort. And sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still get that same prickling sensation on my skin, like it's not over. Story 14. It was one of those perfect June mornings where the air just feels clean, you know? The kind of day where you wake up and the sun is already promising something good. I'd been feeling cooped up in my apartment for weeks, just grinding at work, and I needed to get out, really out. Not just to walk in the local park, but somewhere the noise of the city completely faded away. So I decided on the Olympic National Forest. I'd been there a handful of times before, always sticking to the main trails, but this time I wanted something a little more solitary. I printed out a map for a trail called the Spruce Creek Loop. It was marked as moderate to difficult and had a note saying it was less maintained. That sounded like exactly what I was looking for. I got to the trailhead around 9 in the morning. The parking area was just a patch of gravel off the Forest Service road, and mine was the only car. That should have been my first clue, but at the time it just felt like a win. I remember the sound of my car door closing, echoing in the silence. It was a heavy, thick silence, the kind that feels like a physical thing. I shrugged my backpack on, did a quick check of my water and my knife. I always carry a pocket knife, more for cutting twine or an apple than anything else, and headed in. The first hour or so was exactly what I needed. The trail was narrow, crowded with ferns and salal bushes that brushed wet against my legs, soaking my pants from the knees down. The air was cool and damp, smelling of rotting wood and that specific sweet smell of pine. Sunlight came down in broken pieces through the canopy, making the moss on the trees glow this unreal, electric green. I was in my own head, just putting one foot in front of the other, feeling the good burn in my calves. I remember thinking how everything was just shades of green and brown. It was peaceful. It was the kind of peace that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. After about 2 hours of steady hiking, I started to feel it. My legs were getting tired, and my lower back was tightening up. I found a good spot to take a break. A huge, old-growth cedar had fallen across the trail sometime in the last few years. It was massive, the trunk wider than I am tall, and it was covered in a thick, spongy carpet of moss and those little shelf mushrooms. I shrugged my pack off and let it thud onto the soft ground. I leaned my back against the log, the moss cool and damp through my shirt, and pulled out my water bottle. I took a long drink, the water tasting metallic and cold. This is when it happened. This is the part that's burned into the back of my eyelids. I was just scanning the trees across from me. They were mostly tall Douglas firs, their trunks straight and dark, the branches starting way up high. The undergrowth was a tangled wall of green. My eyes were just drifting, not really looking for anything, just taking it all in. And then I saw movement. It was high up, maybe 30 feet, maybe a little more. At first I thought it was a bear, a black bear cub maybe, stuck in a tree. But it was too big, and the shape was wrong. My brain just sort of stuttered, trying to make the pieces fit. It was crouched on a thick horizontal branch of one of the biggest firs. Its body was bulky, covered in what looked like a shaggy, dark brown coat. It wasn't sleek like a bear's fur. It was more like thick, matted hair. Then I saw the arms. They were long, impossibly long, and thick, like thick ropes of muscle, just hanging down. They weren't resting on its knees or anything. They were just dangling, and they hung down so far that its huge, wide hands were almost level with the branch it was standing on. That's the detail that really got me. The proportions were all wrong. No animal I've ever seen has arms like that. It was crouched, so I couldn't see its legs properly, but the sheer bulk of its upper body was terrifying. My heart, which had been beating a nice, steady rhythm from the hike, just slammed into my throat. It was a physical jolt, like I'd been punched in the chest. I froze. I didn't even breathe. I just stared, and that's when it looked at me. The light must have shifted, because its eyes caught it. They weren't glowing or anything supernatural, but they were 2 points of reflected light in the shadow of its face. I couldn't see the color, just these 2 sharp, intelligent points fixed right on me. It had been watching me. The thought hit me like a bucket of ice water. It had been up there, perched in that tree, and I had walked right underneath it. I had sat down, taken my pack off, completely oblivious. It had been watching me the whole time. A cold sweat broke out all over my body, under my arms, down my back. My hands, still holding my water bottle, started to tremble. I could feel every single hair on my arms and the back of my neck standing straight up. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't the casual glance of a deer or a squirrel. This was a direct, focused, intent stare. It knew I was there. It knew I had seen it, and it was studying me. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only half a minute, a tense, silent standoff. The forest was dead quiet. No birds, no squirrels chattering, nothing. It was as if every other living thing had vanished or was holding its breath, just like I was. Then it moved. It didn't startle or scramble. It shifted its weight on the branch. The branch, which was as thick as my thigh, actually bowed under its weight. It made this low, groaning creak. But the creature itself moved with this easy, fluid balance. It was completely at home up there. It adjusted its position, turning its head and shoulders just a little more towards me. It felt deliberate. It felt like it was showing me that it wasn't afraid. It was letting me know that I was the one out of place. I was the one who was exposed. The gaze felt like a taunt, like it was saying, "I see you, and you can't do a thing about it." My mind was screaming one word over and over, a word I'd only ever heard in silly TV shows and campfire stories. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be, but there was no other box to put this thing in. My rational brain had short-circuited. All that was left was this primal, gut-level fear. This was a predator, or at least something that could be a predator if it wanted to be. And it was between me and the way I needed to go. Then it decided it was done with me. In one motion, it straightened its powerful legs and reached up with those long, long arms. It grabbed a branch above its head and it pulled itself up. It didn't climb like a bear, clumsy and heavy. It moved through the branches with a shocking, silent speed and strength that made my stomach drop. It was so much more agile than something that big had any right to be. It was like watching a gigantic, powerful squirrel. The sound was the worst part. As it moved, the tree protested. There were sharp, cracking snaps as smaller branches gave way, and deep, groaning creaks from the larger ones bending under its weight. The sounds echoed through the quiet forest. Crack, creak, snap. It was moving away from me, deeper into the woods, but the sounds made it seem like it was everywhere at once. I stood there, frozen to the spot, my eyes glued to the spot where I'd last seen it, listening to the sounds of its passage, getting fainter and fainter as it disappeared into the dense canopy. And then silence. The absolute, crushing silence returned. That's when the full weight of the vulnerability hit me. It had been above me. It had been right there, and I had been completely unaware. I had felt safe, leaning against that log. And the whole time, this thing had been looking down at me. What if I hadn't stopped? What if I had kept walking? Would it have just let me pass? Or would it have... I don't know. My brain shied away from the thought. I moved. I didn't think. It was pure instinct. I snatched my backpack off the ground, not even bothering to put it on properly, just clutching it in my arms. I turned around and started walking back the way I came. I wasn't hiking anymore. I was practically running, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break them. I kept looking up. That was the new, terrifying habit. I'd take 5 or 6 frantic steps, then my head would jerk up, my eyes scanning the branches, searching for any dark shape, any movement. The beautiful green canopy had become a threatening ceiling, a place of hiding. Every shadow between the branches looked like a crouching form. Every creak of a tree in the wind made me flinch. The hike back felt 10 times longer. Every rustle in the ferns to my side made me jump. I kept expecting to see it again, to hear those heavy, cracking footsteps behind me, or worse, above me. I didn't stop once. I didn't look back to see if I could spot it again. I just wanted to get to my car. I wanted the solid metal and glass around me. I wanted to hear the engine turn over. When I finally burst out of the tree line and saw the gravel parking lot and my lonely car, it was like surfacing from a nightmare. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the door. I threw my pack into the passenger seat, got in, and locked the doors. I just sat there for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. I could still smell the forest on my clothes, that damp, earthy smell that had once been so comforting and now just smelled like fear. I drove home in a daze. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my family. What would I say? Hey, I think I saw Bigfoot in a tree today. They'd think I was crazy. They'd laugh, or worse, give me that look of polite concern. So I kept it to myself. But it stayed with me. It's been months now, and I still think about it almost every day. It's changed how I see the woods. I don't go hiking alone anymore. I get nervous if I'm outside at night for too long. The thing that really gets me, the thing that keeps me up sometimes, is the fact that it was in the tree. Everyone always talks about finding footprints, about hearing calls in the night, about seeing something moving on the ground. Nobody ever talks about them being in the trees. That thing was a climber. It was at home 30, 40 feet off the ground. It changes everything. It means they could be anywhere, watching, and you'd never even know to look up. The image is seared into my memory. The dark, bulky shape against the rough bark, the impossible length of those arms, and most of all, those 2 points of light where its eyes were, locked onto mine, letting me know that I was seen, I was known, and I was utterly, completely out of my depth. I wasn't the observer in the forest that day. I was the one being observed, and I have no idea what it was thinking or what it wanted. I just know that for 30 seconds I was in its world, and I've never felt so small or so scared in my entire life. I still don't know what it was. I just know what I saw. Story 15. So this was back in late October. I remember because the leaves were all gone, just these bare black branches scratching at the sky. I work as a line cook at this pub in Marquette, and I'd just finished a double, a 10-hour shift on a Saturday, so it was late, really late. The clock on my dashboard said it was just after 2 in the morning. I was dead on my feet, you know? That kind of tired where your eyes feel gritty and your whole body just hums with exhaustion. All I wanted was my bed. My drive home is always the same. I take Highway 550 south out of town. It's not a long drive, maybe 25 minutes, but it feels longer at night. It's a narrow, winding road that cuts through this thick, dense forest right up against Lake Superior. There are no streetlights. Once you're past the last gas station, it's just you, your headlights, and a whole lot of darkness. On one side, there's the big lake, and you can sometimes hear the waves crashing if you roll your window down. On the other side, it's just endless trees and these swampy, boggy areas that I know are full of beaver ponds, and God knows what else. You learn to be alert for deer. They're everywhere up here. I've hit one before years ago, and it totaled my old car. So my eyes are always scanning the edges of the road, watching for those little dots of eye shine in my high beams. That night, I remember it was especially dark. No moon. The air had that cold, damp chill that gets right into your bones. I had the heat on full blast just to keep my window from fogging up. I was maybe 10 minutes into the drive, just past the turnoff for Sugarloaf Mountain. I know that area well. I've hiked there a bunch of times in the summer. The road curves hard to the left there, following the contour of the land. My headlights swept across the asphalt, the yellow lines blinking back at me. I was going maybe 50, which is pretty much the speed limit on that stretch, and then I saw it. It came from the left, from the deep shadows under the trees. At first, my brain, tired as it was, just registered movement. Big movement. I instinctively lifted my foot off the gas, my thumb already hovering over the cruise control cancel. I thought stag, a big buck, but it was too tall, way too tall. It came out onto the road in 2, maybe 3 long strides. It wasn't loping like a bear. Bears, even when they run, they're low to the ground. This thing was upright, like a person, a massive, impossibly large person. My headlights caught it full on then, and my heart just stopped. It felt like a fist had clenched inside my chest. For that one frozen second, I saw everything. It was covered in hair, fur, whatever you call it. It wasn't black like a bear. It was a brownish-red color, like rusty iron, and it had this dull, coarse sheen to it, like wet dog hair but thicker. It was matted in places. I could see that. The body was huge. I mean, the shoulders were massive, sloping down to these long, powerful-looking arms. Its legs were thick like tree trunks. It had to be at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing would have towered over me. But the worst part was that it moved like it was built to walk on 2 legs. It wasn't clumsy. It wasn't an animal pretending to be a person. It was a person-shaped thing made of muscle and fur and pure, raw power. Its stride was long and smooth, eating up the distance across the 2-lane road like it was nothing. It didn't look at me. It just moved with this single-minded purpose, heading for the other side of the road. And that's when the real terror hit me, the kind that's cold and solid in your gut. There's a guardrail on the right side of the road there, where the land drops off into a steep, boggy ravine that leads down to the lake. It's a good 4-foot-tall metal guardrail. This thing didn't climb it. It didn't vault it. It just stepped onto it, like you or I would step onto a curb, 1 foot planted on the top of that thin metal rail, and it pushed off, dropping down into the blackness below. It was effortless, graceful even. The sheer strength that would take it's not possible. No animal I've ever seen could do that. A deer would smash into it. A bear would have to clamber over. This thing treated it like a stepping stone. The whole encounter, from the moment it left the shadows to the moment it vanished, lasted 3 seconds. 4, tops. My car was still moving. I hadn't even slammed on the brakes. I'd just slowed to a crawl, my foot shaking on the pedal. As I passed the spot where it had disappeared, I stared into the darkness. Nothing. Just a wall of black. My headlights didn't penetrate down into that ravine. It was just gone. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles were white. I could feel my pulse hammering in my neck, in my temples. My mouth was dry as dust. I remember this stupid, panicked thought. Did I just see that? Did I really just see that? I should have stopped. A part of me knew that. I should have turned around, called the police, something, but a bigger, much louder part of me was screaming, "Get out of here!" This wasn't a deer, this wasn't a bear, this was something else, and it was out there, in the dark, just beyond that guardrail. And I was alone, completely, utterly alone on a deserted road in the middle of the night. I hit the gas. Not hard, but enough to get moving again. My eyes were glued to my rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty, my own taillights painting the asphalt red. No movement, no shape emerging from the bog to follow me, nothing. But the image was burned into my brain. That human-like form. The immense size, the way it stepped onto the guardrail, it replayed in my head, a short, horrifying film loop. A Sasquatch. The word popped into my head, clear as day. I'd always laughed at those shows, the guys in camo looking for footprints. It was a joke, a silly campfire story. It wasn't a joke anymore. The rest of the drive home was a blur. Every shadow between the trees looked like it was moving. Every stump, every oddly shaped rock made my heart skip a beat. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see a tall, dark figure loping after my car. I've never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, inside a 2-ton metal box. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I just sat there for a minute with the engine running, staring at my dark house. I didn't want to get out. The 20 feet from my car to my front door felt like a mile. The woods behind my house, which I've always thought were peaceful, now felt like they were hiding 1,000 eyes. I ran inside, locked the door behind me, and deadbolted it. I went around and checked every window, every lock. something I haven't done since I was a kid. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on my couch in the dark, listening. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside sounded like a footstep. I told my girlfriend the next day that I'd had a bad dream. She bought it. What was I supposed to say? Hey, honey, I saw Bigfoot on the way home from work? I'd sound insane. I've driven that stretch of road a dozen times since then, always in the daylight. I've even pulled over near that same curve. The guardrail is there, same as always. The bog is down below, thick with dead cattails and leafless alders. It looks normal. It looks like nothing ever happened there. But I know what I saw. I know the difference between being tired and seeing a trick of the light and seeing something so real, so physically present that it rewires your brain. That thing was real. It was solid. It was there. And the part that keeps me up at night, the part that gives me chills even now as I type this in my well-lit living room, isn't just what I saw. It's the way it moved. It wasn't scared of me. It wasn't scared of my car. It just had somewhere to be, and it crossed the road without a second thought. It was so casual, like it owned those woods, like that road was just a minor inconvenience in its night. I saw it for maybe 3 seconds, but in those 3 seconds, everything I thought I knew about the world, about the woods I've lived next to my whole life, just got turned upside down and shaken loose. There's something out there, something big and fast and strong beyond belief, that can step onto a guardrail like it's a sidewalk curb and vanish into a bog without a sound. And I have no idea what to do with that. Story 16. It was one of those mornings where the fog just wouldn't quit. It clung to the hills behind my house like a dirty gray blanket. The kind of day that feels quiet in a way that's heavy, not peaceful. I'd been feeling that unease for weeks, a kind of low-grade hum under the skin, ever since the noises started up again. But this morning, the last Saturday in October, felt different. It felt like the quiet before a storm. I was out on the back porch with my coffee, just staring into the trees that run right up to the edge of my property. My land sits in a dip between Brewster Mountain and Bear Creek, a place that's beautiful and isolated, which is what I'd always loved about it. But that isolation feels different when you start hearing things that don't belong. The dogs, my 2 old coon hounds, Duke and Baron, were already restless. They weren't at the screen door whining to get out like usual. They were just sitting there, still as statues, ears pricked forward, staring into the mist. That was the first thing that put a knot in my gut. They weren't barking, they were just watching. I tried to shrug it off. It's probably a bear, I told myself, or a big buck. But I've lived in these woods my whole life, and you get to know the sounds. You know the difference between a branch breaking under a deer's hoof and one that sounds like it's been ripped in two. I finished my coffee, the ceramic mug feeling too heavy in my hand, and went back inside. The house was too quiet. The only sound was the low, rumbling growl coming from deep in Duke's chest. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were locked on the tree line. That's when the first knock came. It wasn't a loud sound. It was a single, solid thock that echoed through the valley. It didn't sound like a tree falling or a branch snapping. It was too clean, too purposeful. It was the kind of sound you'd make if you took a big piece of wood and smacked it hard against the trunk of a solid oak. It came from the west, up the slope of Brewster. My blood went cold. I'd read about wood knocks in those silly Bigfoot forums, the kind of thing you chuckle at when you're bored online. But hearing it out here with the dogs acting like this, it wasn't funny anymore. I stood frozen in my kitchen, my hand still on the counter. The knock hung in the air for a second, and then the silence rushed back in, thicker than before. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird-like flutter that felt out of place in my chest. This is it, I thought. This is that feeling from when I was a kid, that pure, undiluted fear. I was 8 years old again, staring out the window of my dad's pickup truck on Highway 92 in Kentucky, watching a tall, brownish shape melt back into the pines. That thing had looked right at me, and now, 50-some years later, that same feeling was back, sitting in my kitchen in Tennessee. I forced myself to move. I walked to the back door and peered out the little window, my breath fogging the glass. Nothing. Just the shifting grey of the fog and the dark, wet trunks of the trees. The dogs had come to stand behind me, pressing their warm bodies against my legs. They were trembling. I reached down and ran a hand over Baron's head, and I could feel the tightness of the muscles in his neck. Then another knock came, this one from the east, from the direction of Bear Creek. It was an answer, a response. Thok, it was slightly higher pitched, a different kind of wood, a conversation. My mouth went dry. This wasn't random. This was something intelligent, something that knew what it was doing. For the next hour, it was a game of cat and mouse I didn't want to play. The knocks would come, sometimes from one ridge, sometimes from the other. I'd hear a heavy, shuffling tread in the wet leaves, a sound too big and too slow for a deer. It would get closer, and I'd feel my body go rigid, my hand instinctively reaching for the rifle I keep by the door. Then the sound would stop, and a few minutes later, a knock would echo from 100 yards farther away. It was toying with me. It was letting me know it was there, that it could be anywhere, and that I was trapped in my little house. The fear was a physical thing by then. It was a cold sweat on the back of my neck, a tightness in my throat that made it hard to swallow. My palms were slick. I kept checking the locks on the doors and windows, even though some deep primal part of my brain knew that a standard door lock wasn't going to mean a thing if what was out there decided it wanted in. I thought about calling someone, but who? The sheriff? And say what? That I'm hearing knocks in the woods? He'd think I was a crazy old man. My mind flashed back to 1986 behind that church in Tennessee, the way that handful of dirt and gravel had rained down on my car hood from nowhere. The sheer, impossible distance it had been thrown. The tall, reddish-brown thing I'd seen standing in the shadows just watching me. The terror that had made me slam the car into gear and speed home. My hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel. My mum had said the dogs had been going crazy all afternoon, just like now. The knocks stopped around mid-morning. The silence that followed was somehow worse. It was a waiting silence. I stood at the window, not moving, barely breathing. The fog had started to thin, letting a weak grey light filter through the trees. Duke let out a low whine, and then the thuds started. These weren't knocks. These were heavy, jarring impacts that I could feel through the soles of my feet. Whump! A pause. Whump! It was like someone was dropping a giant sack of concrete onto the ground. The vibrations were subtle, but they were there. Each one made my teeth jar together. Whump! It was close, too close. It was just beyond the tree line, maybe 50 yards from my back porch. I couldn't just stand there anymore. I had to see. I had to know. The rifle felt foreign and clumsy in my hands, but the weight of it was a small comfort. I cracked the back door open, the hinge creaking loudly in the unnatural quiet. The cold, damp air hit my face. The smell of wet earth and decay was strong. I took a step out onto the porch, the wooden planks cold even through my boots. The thuds had stopped. The woods were dead silent. Not a bird, not a squirrel, nothing. It was like every living thing had been vacuumed out of the valley. I scanned the tree line, my eyes straining to see into the shadows between the trunks. Nothing moved. I took another step down onto the gravel path that leads to my woodpile. That's when the first rock came. It didn't come from the sky. It came in low and fast, on a line like a baseball pitch. It hit the side of my metal storage shed with a deafening bang that made me jump and almost drop the rifle. It wasn't a random stone. It was a fist-sized piece of river rock, the kind you find down in the creek bed. It hit with so much force, it left a deep dent in the shed's aluminum siding. My heart wasn't fluttering anymore. It was a solid, painful slam in my chest. I brought the rifle up, pointing it in the general direction the rock had come from, but my hands were shaking so badly the barrel was wobbling all over the place. I was hyperventilating, little puffs of white breath clouding in front of my face. This was no longer a game. This was a threat. A second rock whizzed past my head. I heard it more than saw it, a sharp zip of air right by my left ear before it smacked into the trunk of a hickory tree behind me. I stumbled back, my boots slipping on the wet gravel. I fell hard on my backside, the rifle clattering away from me. The air rushed out of my lungs. For a second, I was just lying there, vulnerable, staring up at the grey sky, totally exposed. I scrambled on my hands and knees, gravel digging into my palms until I got a hold of the rifle again. I crab-walked backwards until my back hit the rough wood of the porch steps. I crouched there, panting, trying to make myself as small as possible. The dogs were going insane inside, barking and throwing themselves against the door. It knew where I was. It had missed on purpose. That second rock could have taken my head off if it had wanted it to. The accuracy was terrifying. It was a warning, a show of force, just like the gravel on my car hood all those years ago, a demonstration of power from a creature that didn't want to be seen, but wanted you to know it was there and that it was stronger than you. I stayed crouched there for what felt like an hour, my muscles screaming from the tension. Nothing else happened. No more rocks, no more knocks, no more thuds. The woods were still silent. Slowly, painfully, I got to my feet and backed into the house, never taking my eyes off the tree line. I locked the door and slid down to the floor, my back against it, the rifle across my lap. I just sat there, listening to the frantic beating of my own heart. The afternoon dragged on. The fog burned off completely, leaving a clear, cold day. The normal sounds of the woods slowly returned. A jay calling, the rustle of a squirrel. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The presence was gone, the oppressive weight had lifted. But the fear hadn't. It was coiled deep in my belly, a cold, hard knot. Once I felt like I could move without my legs giving out, I went back outside. I had to see. I had to know what was left. I walked over to the shed first. The dent was there, deep and undeniable. I picked up the rock that had made it. It was cold and heavy in my hand. I walked to the edge of my property, to where the woods begin, and that's where I saw it. A young maple sapling, about as thick as my wrist, was snapped in half. Not broken and hanging, snapped clean, about 4 feet off the ground. The break was fresh, the wood white and splintered. The top half of the tree was lying several feet away. Next to it, on the ground, was a pile of rocks. They weren't from my property. They were the same smooth grey river rocks, a small pile of them, just sitting there in a clearing, as if they'd been placed. An offering, a message. I stood there for a long time, just looking at that broken tree and that pile of stones. The sun was starting to go down, casting long, cold shadows through the woods. That's when I heard it one last time. It wasn't a knock or a thud. It was a sound that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. A low-pitched howl that seemed to vibrate right through my bones. It wasn't like a wolf or a coyote. It was deeper, more guttural, with a weird, almost warbling quality to it. It echoed through the hills between Brewster and the creek. A long, lonely sound that was full of something I can't even describe. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was just other. It was the sound of something that doesn't belong in our world, something old and powerful and utterly terrifying. It howled once, and then the sound faded away, leaving only the whisper of the wind in the pines. I went back inside. I locked the door. I haven't slept right since. Every little noise from the woods makes me jump. I look out the window constantly. I keep the rifle loaded by my bed now. That was weeks ago. The knocks haven't come back. The rocks haven't been thrown. But I know it's still out there. I know what I saw when I was 8. I know what I saw when I was a young man. And I know, without a single doubt, what was here with me that day. It connected all the dots, from my childhood to right now. It's real, and it knows where I live. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it's chosen to torment me. I just know the fear is a part of me now, a cold stone I carry with me everywhere I go. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right, I think I can still hear that low, guttural howl, echoing somewhere up on Brewster Mountain, a sound that stops my heart dead every single time. Story 17. All right, I've been sitting on this for years, and I guess it's time to just type it out. I don't talk about it much, because honestly, it sounds insane, and saying it out loud makes me feel like one of those guys on those TV shows. But it happened. I know what I saw, and it changed everything for me. This was back on the evening of May 23rd, 2007. A Tuesday, I think. I remember because I'd just gotten paid, and my week was just starting to wind down. I live out in the country, a few miles outside of Cloverdale, Indiana. It's the kind of place where you know your neighbors, but your nearest neighbor might be a half-mile down the road. I'd been into town to pick up a few things, mostly just a carton of cigarettes. I was a smoker back then, a bad habit I've since kicked, but that night, it was the only reason I was out. I remember the sky was just starting to get that deep, bruised purple color that comes before it goes completely black. It wasn't late, maybe around 8:30. The kind of late spring evening that's usually peaceful, with the air still warm from the day and fireflies just starting to blink in the fields. My drive home was along Jackie Dunn Hill Road. It's a winding back road. Not much more than paved gravel, really. It cuts through some pretty dense woods and rolls over 3 big hills before it spits you out near my property. I'd driven it 1,000 times, probably more. I knew every pothole, every dip where the rain would collect. I knew the woods on either side, too. I'd spent most of my life in those woods. As a kid, I'd built forts in them. As an adult, I hunted squirrel and deer in them. I'd forage for morel mushrooms every spring. I knew the sound of every branch snapping, the difference between a raccoon rustling in the leaves and a deer moving through. I was comfortable there. It was my backyard. I never ever felt afraid, not once. So that night, I was just driving, one hand on the wheel, the other probably fiddling with the radio dial, trying to find a station that wasn't just static or preaching. My headlights cut a path through the growing dark, and the trees on either side were just solid walls of blackness. I remember my mind was on nothing in particular, just thinking about work the next day, whether I remembered to lock the shed, the usual junk. I went over the first hill, then the second. The car dipped down and then rose up again. It was a familiar motion. As I started up the third hill, my headlights swept up the road, and that's when I saw it. On the left side of the road, maybe 50, 60 yards ahead, right at the tree line, there was this tall, dark shape. My first thought, my absolute first, normal thought, was that it was a burn tree. We'd had some brush fires a few years back, and there were a few scorched skeletons of trees still standing in that area. It was tall and thin and pitch black, just standing there, not moving. It didn't register as a threat. It didn't register as anything alive. It was just a thing, a part of the landscape. I kept driving, my eyes kind of glossing over it, but as I got closer, maybe 30 yards out, something felt off. The shape of it was wrong for a tree. It was too solid, too vertical. A burned tree is spindly, it has branches, it looks brittle. This was a solid column, and it was tall, really tall. My brain was trying to catch up, filing through the possibilities. A black trash bag caught on a branch, a weird shadow, a prank. But who would be out here? I was maybe 20 yards away now, and my headlights were finally hitting it directly, washing over it, and that's when it moved. It wasn't a big movement at first. It was a subtle shift, like it was turning its upper body, and in that instant, my brain short-circuited, because it wasn't a tree, it wasn't a shadow, it was a figure, a man-shaped figure, but impossibly huge. The headlights lit it up, and I saw it was covered, and I mean completely covered head to toe, in this thick, shaggy black hair. It was like a living shadow made of coarse fur, and its face. It was darker than the rest of it, just a patch of shadow. But I could make out the shape of a head, and I had the distinct, chilling impression of deep-set eyes. Time just stopped. It felt like my heart seized up in my chest. My foot instinctively lifted off the gas, and the car began to slow, but I was too frozen to hit the brake. I just coasted, staring. It was standing sideways to me at first, but as my headlights fully illuminated it, it turned its whole body to face me. We were maybe 15 feet apart. I could see the sheer mass of it. It had to be at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were massive, incredibly broad, and the arms were long, hanging down past its knees. The hair wasn't smooth. It was matted and wild, like an animal that had been through thick brambles. The smell hit me a second later, even through my closed car window. It was a wave of pure, foul stench. A mix of rotting meat, wet dog, and something else, something deeply musky and alien. It made my eyes water and my stomach turn. For a few seconds, it couldn't have been more than 3 or 4, but it felt like an hour. We just looked at each other. It was a standoff. Its eyes, whatever color they were, seemed to lock onto mine. There was an intelligence there, not a human intelligence, but a deep, primal awareness. It knew I was there. It knew I was seeing it. And I knew, with a certainty that turned my blood to ice, that this was not a bear, not a man in a suit, not a hallucination. This was something else, something that wasn't supposed to be real. My mind was screaming, a jumble of panic and disbelief. Bigfoot. The word exploded in my head, but it felt too silly, too trivial for the sheer raw terror of what I was looking at. This was a monster from a campfire story, but it was standing right there, breathing, its chest moving slowly. I could see the steam of its breath in the cool evening air, lit by my headlights. Then it moved again. It didn't run. It didn't charge. It just turned its head, looked away from me and into the dark woods to its right, and then it took a step. Not a normal step, a long, effortless, loping stride that covered an impossible amount of ground. Its whole body moved with a powerful, fluid grace that was terrifying. It was built for those woods in a way I could never comprehend. It took one more step, and it was gone, just vanished. 1 second, it was there, a massive, tangible thing seared into my vision by the headlights, and the next, the darkness of the woods had just swallowed it whole. The silence that followed was deafening. My car had rolled to a complete stop. The engine was still running, a low, steady rumble that sounded obscenely normal. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles were white and aching. I could feel a cold sweat all over my body, soaking through my shirt. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. I was breathing in short, ragged gasps. I just sat there, staring at the empty spot where it had been. My brain was trying to process what had just happened. I kept replaying it, the way it turned, the 2 steps, the complete and utter silence of its movement. There had been no sound, no crack of a twig, no rustle of leaves, nothing. That was almost as frightening as the thing itself. Something that big should make noise. I don't know how long I sat there. A minute? 5? Finally, a jolt of pure animal fear shot through me. What if it's still close? What if it's watching me? I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The tires squealed on the pavement, and the car lurched forward. I didn't look left or right. I just stared straight ahead, my eyes glued to the road, driving way too fast for that winding lane. Every shadow between the trees looked like a moving shape. Every noise my car made seemed to mask something else, something moving out there. I didn't slow down until I saw the lights of my house. I skidded into my driveway, threw the car in park, and ran inside, locking the door behind me and leaning against it, my whole body trembling. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, just listening. Every creak of the house, every hoot of an owl, made me jump. I kept peering out the windows into the darkness, half expecting to see that tall, dark shape standing at the edge of my lawn, staring back. The next day, in the bright, rational light of the morning, I tried to talk myself out of it. "A bear," I said, "a trick of the light. But I've seen bears. This was no bear. The proportions were all wrong. The way it stood, the way it moved. It was bipedal, upright and confident. And the smell. I've never smelled anything like that from any animal around here." A few days later, I got up the nerve to drive back to that spot in the daylight. I parked my car and walked over to where I'd seen it. The ground was soft from recent rain, and right there, at the edge of the tree line, were footprints. They were huge, long, wider than my hand, and deep. They weren't bear tracks. They looked almost human, but too big, and the stride between them was enormous, just like I'd seen. I didn't have a camera with me, and part of me was glad. I didn't want proof. Proof would make it more real. I just stood there, looking at those prints, and the same cold fear washed over me. I got back in my car and left. I never went back to that specific spot again. That was the real change. Before that night, the woods were my sanctuary. I'd go out alone for hours, just walking, hunting, thinking. I felt at home there. After that, the woods became a place of dread. The familiar sounds became threatening. The comfortable shadows became hiding spots. I tried to go mushroom hunting the next spring, something I'd always loved. I got about 20 feet into the tree line behind my house, and a panic attack hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my vision swam, and I had to stumble back out into the open field, my heart racing. I haven't set foot in any wooded area alone since. Not once. I can't. The comfort is gone, replaced by a permanent low-level wariness. I always kind of believed that something like Bigfoot could exist. The world's a big place, there are remote areas, it seemed possible, but now I don't believe it. I know it. I don't need a TV show or a blurry photo to tell me. I saw it with my own eyes. I smelled it. I felt the sheer physical terror of its presence. That moment when it turned and my headlights lit up its massive, hairy body and that dark, featureless face is burned into my memory forever. It's a scar. It shattered my whole perception of the world and my place in it. I was just a guy driving home for a smoke, and in a few frozen seconds, everything I thought I knew about the woods, about safety, about what's real, was just gone. Story 18. Okay, I'll try to write this out the way it happened. I'm still not great at talking about it, even now, years later. My hands are a little shaky just typing this, but people should know. I don't know what it was, but it was real. It was October, back in 2014. I was working a remote gold claim way out in the British Columbia interior. My name's not important. I was in my 40s then, a heavy equipment operator by trade. I'd been at this particular site for a few weeks. The company had a small camp set up a couple miles from the actual dig site, but that day, I was the only one out there. It was just me and the excavator. The day had been totally normal, just a standard boring Tuesday. The sky was that pale, washed-out blue you get in the fall, and the air had that crisp bite to it, the kind that tells you winter isn't far off. I'd been running the excavator since morning, down near a creek that cut through the claim. The machine was an older model, a real workhorse, and the steady thrum of the diesel engine was like a second heartbeat. You get used to the noise, the vibration through the seat, the smell of diesel and hot metal. It becomes background. You're just focused on the dirt, on the rhythm of the hydraulics, scoop, swing, dump. Your world shrinks to the inside of that cab and the patch of ground you're tearing up. I was starting to wrap up for the day. The light was getting long, casting deep shadows through the pine and fir trees. I remember checking the clock on the dash. It was just after 5 in the evening. I dug out a decent section of the bank and was about to shut her down, go through the shutdown sequence and make the bumpy drive back to camp for some hot food. That's when I heard it. It wasn't part of the machine's usual symphony of clanks and rumbles. This was different. A dull, heavy thump that came from outside. It echoed just once, like something massive had taken a single step. I froze, my hand on the control lever. My first thought was, stupidly, a rock slide. But it wasn't that kind of sound. It was too isolated, too deliberate. I sat there, not moving, listening so hard my ears started to ring with the silence. The engine was still rumbling, a low idle. Then it came again. Thump. Closer this time, much closer, and heavier. The sound had a weight to it that I could feel in my chest. It wasn't a tree falling, it wasn't an animal running, it was a footstep, something walking, something big. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked beat. I slowly, carefully eased the control lever back to neutral. The hydraulics sighed into silence. Now, with the engine just idling, the world outside the cab became audible. The creek gurgling, the wind sighing through the high branches, and nothing else. I peered out through the grimy, dust-caked window of the cab. The glass was thick, safety glass, but it was always covered in a fine layer of silt and mud splatter. I was looking toward the tree line about 50 feet away. The brush was thick there, alder and devil's club, and it was moving, not from the wind. The wind was up high, rustling the tops of the pines. Down here, the air was still, but the brush was shifting, parting, like something was pushing its way through, not crashing through, but moving with a powerful, unstoppable force. Branches were snapping, but with low, thick cracks, not the light snapping of a deer. Then my breath just stopped in my throat. It literally caught. I couldn't inhale. It stepped out from the trees. I'm a big guy, 6 feet tall, 230 pounds. I've worked around big machinery my whole life. I know what big is. This was something else. It was standing upright, on 2 legs. And it was huge. I'm not good at estimating, but I'd put it over 8.5 feet tall, maybe closer to 9. Its body was covered in hair, long and shaggy, a dark brown, almost black in the shadow of the trees, but with these lighter, grizzled patches on its chest and shoulders. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees, ending in what looked like hands. Its chest was broad, massively wide, layered with muscle that bunched and moved under that thick coat. Its legs were like tree trunks. It just stood there for a second, at the edge of the clearing, and it stared right at the excavator. I was paralyzed. My brain was just screaming one word, over and over. No, no, no. This wasn't possible. This was a joke. This was a dream. But the cold plastic of the control lever under my hand was real. The smell of my own sweat was real. It took a step forward. Not a clumsy, lurching step. A powerful, deliberate stride. Its feet were big. I couldn't see details, but it left deep impressions in the soft earth. It walked right up to the excavator, stopping maybe 10 feet away from the tracks. It tilted its head. It was examining the machine. Its face. God, its face. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a man in a suit. The head was conical, kind of, with a heavy brow ridge that shadowed its eyes. I couldn't see the color of its eyes, just dark sockets, but I could feel its gaze. It was intelligent. It was curious. Then it turned its head and looked directly at me. It knew I was in here. It hadn't just found a strange metal object. It had found me. The terror that washed over me was a physical thing, a cold wave that left me numb and trembling. I was making this little noise in the back of my throat, a whimper I didn't even know I was making. It started walking again, coming around the side of the excavator, directly toward the cab. I was up high, maybe 10 feet off the ground in the operator's cab, and this thing, its head was almost level with the window. It stopped right beside me, so close I could see the individual, coarse hairs on its body, could see the power in its shoulders. It lifted its arm. The hand was enormous, fingers thick and long, the palm wide. The fingers weren't like a human's, they were more proportional, powerful. The hand was covered in the same dark hair, but the palm looked leathery, and it was smudged with dirt and what looked like dark sap. It pressed that huge hand flat against the window. The glass, this thick, reinforced safety glass, flexed. I saw it bow inward with a faint creaking sound. I could see the lines of its palm, the dirt under its fingernails, which were dark and thick like chipped slate. I shouted. It was a raw, useless sound. "Hey, get away!" My voice was thin and reedy inside the sealed cab. It didn't react. It just kept its hand there, pressing. Then it pulled its arm back and slammed the side of its fist into the cab. The sound was a deafening, metallic boom! The entire machine shook. I was thrown against my seatbelt. The noise was so loud it felt like it punched the air from my lungs. It hit it again. Boom! The steel frame of the cab groaned. I could feel the vibrations through the seat, through the floor, right up into my teeth. I was screaming now, proper screams, just pure, undiluted fear. I fumbled for the radio, my hands slick with sweat. I keyed the mic. Base, come in. I need help. There's something out here." Nothing, just static. The radio was dead. I'd had trouble with it all week, but now, of all times, it was completely silent. I was alone, trapped in a metal box that was suddenly feeling very, very flimsy. It moved away from the window. I heard its heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel as it circled the machine. I twisted in my seat, trying to keep it in view, my heart trying to batter its way out of my chest. It went around to the back, where the access ladder is. A steel ladder welded to the side so you can climb up to the cab. I heard a metal groan, a sharp, protesting shriek of stressed steel. I looked out the back window and saw it. It had grabbed the top of the ladder with one hand. It didn't yank it, it just bent it. It put its weight into it, and the solid steel rungs and supports just twisted outward, buckling like a piece of licorice. With a final, sickening screech, the whole ladder tore away from its welds and dropped to the ground with a heavy clatter. Then it came back to the side of the cab. It leaned its shoulder into it. It was trying to push the excavator over. The machine, which must have weighed 40 tons, shifted. I felt one of the tracks lift slightly off the ground. The steel groaned again, a deep, agonized sound I never want to hear again. This thing was strong enough to move an excavator. The focused, aware strength of it was the most terrifying part. It wasn't just smashing randomly. It was testing. It was trying to get in. It came back to the front, its face appearing in the windshield this time. It was so close. I could smell it now, a musky, thick odor like wet dog and old earth, and something else, something wild and pungent like a boar. It raised both of its hands and slammed them, palms flat, against the front glass. A spiderweb of cracks instantly appeared in the windshield, radiating out from the point of impact. The glass didn't shatter, but it was ruined. A fine web of white lines now obscured my view. That was the breaking point for me. The panic took over completely, flooding my system with pure adrenaline. I wasn't thinking, I was just acting. My hands, shaking violently, found the controls. I turned the key, revving the engine from its idle to a full-throated roar. The creature paused, its hands still on the cracked glass. It seemed surprised by the sudden noise. I didn't think. I just grabbed the two main control levers and I swung the boom arm. The excavator's arm is massive, with a heavy bucket on the end. I wasn't trying to hit it, I don't think. I was just trying to scare it, to make a big, threatening movement. I swung the arm in a wide, fast arc toward the front of the machine. The hydraulics whined, the whole machine lurched. The creature jumped back. It was fast, unbelievably fast for its size. It moved back about 20 feet in two quick, powerful strides. It stood there, its chest heaving. I could see the steam of its breath in the cold evening air. It didn't make a roar. It didn't snarl. It just looked at me through the cracked windshield. And then it let out this sound. It was a long, deep exhalation. It sounded almost like a sigh of what? Resignation? Frustration? I don't know. It was a human-like sound, and that made it 1,000 times worse. It took another step back, then another, its eyes never leaving the cab. It backed away steadily, watching me, until it reached the tree line. It stopped there, one hand on a tall pine, and it just looked back for one last long moment. Its gaze was heavy, intelligent, and I felt pinned by it like a bug in a collection. Then it turned, and in 2 steps, it was gone. It just melted into the timber. The brush swayed once, and then was still. I didn't move. I sat there, my hands glued to the controls, my foot jammed on the pedal. The engine was still roaring. I don't know how long I sat there. It could have been 2 minutes. It could have been 10. The only sound was the diesel engine and the frantic thumping of my heart. Slowly, carefully, like I was made of glass, I lowered the boom arm, put the machine in neutral, and just Saturday. The silence rushed back in. The creek gurgled, the wind sighed. I finally shut the engine down. The sudden quiet was deafening. I unbuckled my seatbelt with fumbling fingers and climbed out of the cab, my legs so weak I almost fell down the side of the machine. I'd forgotten the ladder was gone. I had to half jump, half fall to the ground. I didn't look around, I didn't investigate, I just ran to my pickup truck, fumbled the keys, and got the hell out of there. I drove back to camp so fast I almost rolled the truck on the rough track. The next day, in the daylight, with 3 other guys from the crew, we went back. The excavator was sitting there, silent. The bent and torn ladder was on the ground. The cab was covered in deep, hand-shaped dents in the steel. The windshield was a mess of cracks, and in the soft earth around the machine there were footprints. They were huge, long, and clearly showed a bipedal gait. We took pictures. We measured them. Nobody said much. What was there to say? I told my foreman I wouldn't work alone anymore. He saw the machine, he saw my face, and he didn't argue. I finished out that contract, but I was never the same. Every crack of a branch, every odd sound in the woods, and my heart would leap into my throat. I never saw it again, but I know what I saw that day. It was real, it was strong, it was smart, and it knew I was in that machine. The focused awareness in its eyes, the sheer power it had. That's what haunts me. It wasn't a mindless beast. It was something else, and I have no explanation for it. None at all. I just know it happened. Story 19. It has been 5 years now, and I still don't know what to make of it. I don't talk about it with people around here, because they'd either think I'm crazy or worse, get curious and come poking around my property. But I need to put this somewhere just to get it out of my head. It's been eating at me, this secret, and maybe writing it down will make it feel less like a dream and more like the thing that actually happened to me. I own a small vineyard in southern Oregon, right near the California border. It's not a huge commercial operation, just something I built from the ground up over the last 15 years. It's my life. I know every vine, every row, the way the morning sun hits the dew on the leaves. It's quiet out here, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. Most of the time it's peaceful. But 5 years ago, that peace was broken, and it hasn't really felt the same since. It started in late summer, right before harvest was supposed to begin. I was doing my morning walkthrough, checking the sugar levels in the grapes, when I noticed something weird. One entire row, the Zinfandel row on the western edge, closest to the forest, was completely stripped clean. Not a single grape was left. The vines themselves were fine. No damage, no broken branches, nothing. It was like someone had come through with surgical precision and just taken every last grape. At first, I thought it was kids, teenagers from town messing around, or maybe some deer had finally figured out how to get past the basic fencing I had up. So I fixed the fence in a few spots that looked a bit weak and set up some of those motion-activated noise deterrents, the ones that let out a high-pitched sound when something moves nearby. I figured that would scare off any animals. The next morning, the same row was stripped again, clean as a whistle, and the noise deterrent was smashed, not just broken, but crushed like something had stomped on it. A cold knot started to form in my stomach. This wasn't kids. Kids would have made a mess, trampled other plants, left candy wrappers or something. This was methodical, and the fence wasn't just bent. In one spot, a post was leaning at a crazy angle, like something really heavy had pushed against it. I spent the whole day on edge. I started looking at the ground more carefully. The soil between the rows is soft, and I found footprints. They were huge. I mean massive, way bigger than any bear track I'd ever seen, and I've seen plenty. They were vaguely human-shaped, but long, really long, with a wide splay to the toes. My heart was hammering just looking at them. I tried to tell myself it was a deformed bear, some freak of nature, but it didn't feel right. Bears don't strip a single row of grapes with that kind of care. They're messy. That's when I decided I had to see for myself. I wasn't going to sleep until I knew what was happening. I have an old pickup truck, a beat-up Ford that I use for hauling equipment. I parked it at the end of the Zinfandel row, tucked in between two bigger storage sheds so it wasn't too obvious. I brought a heavy jacket, a thermos of coffee, and a powerful flashlight, though I was too scared to actually use it. I just wanted to see. I figured I'd sit there all night if I had to. The hours dragged. It was one of those clear, cold nights where the stars are so bright they look like pinpricks in black velvet. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no wind, nothing. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on you. I remember sipping my coffee, the warmth of the metal thermos cup in my hands, and just staring out the windshield into the darkness of the forest line. My vineyard is on a bit of a slope, and the woods are a dark wall at the bottom of the property. At night, they just look like a pit of nothing. I must have dozed off for a minute, because the next thing I knew, a sound jolted me awake. It wasn't a loud sound. That was the worst part. It was a soft, rustling crunch, the sound of a footstep in the dry summer grass. Not a twig snap, not a crash, just a placement of weight. My whole body went rigid. I slowly, so slowly it felt like my bones were creaking, leaned forward and peered through the windshield. At first, I couldn't see anything, just the deep shadows between the vines. Then, something moved. It came out of the tree line, not with a burst of speed, but with a slow, deliberate emergence. It was just a darker shape in the darkness at first, but as it stepped into the faint starlight filtering through the vines, my breath caught in my throat. It was tall, so goddamn tall. It had to be at least 8 feet, maybe more, and it was covered in hair, a dark, shaggy coat that seemed to absorb the light. It walked on 2 legs, but it wasn't a clumsy walk. It was fluid, powerful, and completely silent. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they swung slightly as it moved. I felt a primal fear then, a kind of terror that comes from a place deeper than your brain. It's a feeling in your gut, in your spine, a voice screaming that you are not the top of the food chain. I was frozen. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. I just sat there, my hands clutching the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. It went straight to the Zinfandel row. It didn't look around. It didn't hesitate. It knew exactly where it was going, and then it started to pick the grapes. This is the part that haunts me the most, the part that makes it impossible to dismiss as just a bear. It used its hands. Not its mouth, not claws raking through the vines. Its hands, they were huge with long, thick fingers. It would reach out, gently take a bunch of grapes between its thumb and fingers, pluck them from the stem, and bring them to its mouth. I couldn't see its face clearly, just a dark profile, but I saw the movement of its arm, the way it ate. It was deliberate, almost thoughtful. It moved down the row with an efficiency that was terrifying. It wasn't greedy, it wasn't frantic, it was harvesting. It would strip one vine, take a silent step to the next, and do the same thing. There was no sound except for the very faint, wet sound of it eating. No breathing I could hear, no grunts, nothing. I was shaking, my teeth were chattering, and I had to clamp my jaw shut to stop them. The coffee I'd drunk felt like acid in my stomach. I was terrified it would hear my heart, which was beating so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. About halfway down the row it stopped. It just froze. Its head, which had been bent down towards the vines, slowly came up. It turned, not its whole body, but just its head, and it looked directly at my truck. I swear to God, it looked right at me. I don't know how it knew. I hadn't made a sound. The windows were up. But it knew. I was staring into the darkness where its face was, and I could feel its attention on me. It was a physical pressure, a weight. I felt seen, in a way I have never felt seen before or since. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. There was an intelligence there, a cold, assessing awareness that made my blood run cold. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, locked in that silent stare through the grimy glass of my windshield. I was certain that was it. I was going to die. This thing was going to walk over, rip the door off the truck, and that would be the end of me. But it didn't. After a few seconds that stretched into forever, it slowly, deliberately turned its head back towards the vines. It reached out, plucked one last bunch of grapes and ate them. Then it just turned and walked back towards the forest. Its walk was the same as before, silent, powerful, and utterly confident. It didn't look back. It just melted into the shadows at the edge of the trees and was gone. I don't know how long I sat there. The sky was starting to lighten from black to deep blue when I finally managed to unlock my fingers from the steering wheel. My whole body was stiff and cold. I stumbled out of the truck, my legs barely holding me up, and walked over to the Zinfandel row. It was perfect. Every grape was gone. The vines were untouched, not a leaf out of place. It was the cleanest, most efficient harvest I had ever seen. I stood there in the creeping dawn, looking at the empty vines, then at the dark, silent forest. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep into my bones, what I had seen. All the stories, the legends, the blurry photos, they were all real. I had just looked a Sasquatch in the eye. The rest of the harvest that year, I left that one row alone. I didn't touch it. When the time came, I harvested every other part of my vineyard, but I left the Zinfandel on the western edge for it. And it came back. A week after I'd finished my main harvest, I came out in the morning, and the Zinfandel row was stripped clean again. It's become a ritual. Every year since then, for the past 5 years, I leave that row. And every year, a few days after I finish the rest of the harvest, I wake up to find it perfectly cleaned out. It never touches any other row. It never causes any other trouble. No broken fences, no smashed equipment. It just comes, takes its share, and leaves. People ask me sometimes why I don't farm that row anymore. I just tell them the soil is bad there, that the grapes don't ripen right. It's easier than the truth. I've thought about setting up a camera 1,000 times, but I don't. That night, in that silent stare, I felt like we came to an understanding. I stay out of its way, and it stays out of mine. It's a wary, tense coexistence, but it's a peace I'm not willing to break. I saw what it could do. I saw the power in its shoulders, the intelligence in its gaze. I'm not going to provoke it, so I let it have its row of Zinfandel. It's a small price to pay. Sometimes, on a still night, I'll look out my kitchen window towards that dark line of trees, and I'll wonder if it's out there looking back, and I'll feel that same cold knot in my stomach, the memory of that midnight terror, and I'll know that some mysteries are better left alone. I just tend my vines, and it takes its share, and we leave it at that. I don't know why it chose my vineyard or why it likes Zinfandel. Of all things, I guess I'll never know. It's just the way it is now.